Marvel, I have Black Myth Wukong templates. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 101, Heaven and Earth Dragnet. Lin Feng smiled and spread his hands upward. A golden ball of light gathered in his hands. The ball of light burst out countless streams of light and extended to the ground. A huge formation was formed on the ground in an instant. At this time, the agents who were fleeing to the west did not know that the land under their feet was already in the formation. No matter where they fled, they could not escape from Lin Feng's palm, not to mention that all the instruments and equipment on them had already lost their signals. Under such an overwhelming gap, their fate was already doomed. At this time, on the other side of the forest, Natasha was rushing here quickly. She was only concerned about the mission and had no idea what she was about to face. Suddenly, startled birds flew up. Gunshots rang out in the woods. In the confrontation between you and me, mixed with a few curses in foreign languages, one of the parties shouted, "Who shot?" Now everyone is busy evacuating. Why did you shoot? Why don't you find Professor Lin Feng to evacuate? The other side shouted loudly and continued to shoot. The two groups of people fighting at this time were a certain country's intelligence agency and an armed organization. The former happened to be in front when Lin Feng eliminated the mercenary leader, so he saw everything clearly. Therefore, they did not dare to linger on the mission at all and fled out with the intelligence agencies of other countries. But they did not expect to encounter an armed organization that had just arrived here and did not understand the situation. Why did they have to fight with them? The intelligence agency gritted its teeth helplessly and responded to the increasingly fierce attacks over there. Hand over Professor Lin Feng. Otherwise, don't even think about leaving. The armed organization shouted again. At this time, they believed that the intelligence agency that was eager to leave must have caught Lin Feng. Otherwise they would not be so anxious to evacuate. Seeing that explanations were useless, the intelligence agency had to increase its firepower, and the two sides fought vigorously. For a while, the originally quiet forest was instantly filled with bullets, and fierce gunfire sounded in the forest. The people in the intelligence agency couldn't help but clench their guns and cursed secretly, saying that they were really unlucky. The others had disappeared long ago, but they had to run into this group of idiots. Now they couldn't escape. They were trapped here. What should they do? If Professor Lin Feng found them, they couldn't help but try to negotiate again. Stop. The situation is very critical now. Everyone has run away. If you want to live, stop and evacuate to the west. Who are you trying to fool with this nonsense? Do you think we have no brains? In response to them, they were attacked more fiercely. Hearing the enemy's words, the director of the intelligence bureau turned pale. At the moment of life and death, they were always likely to be discovered by Professor Lin Feng. Not only that, if other forces took the opportunity to join in the conspiracy against them, they would all be defeated here. Just as they were thinking about this and lamenting the unfairness of their fate, bursts of gunfire were heard from other places around them. Those elites who only wanted to escape were confused and didn't understand why everyone didn't avoid Professor Lin Feng, but fought each other. Natasha, who had been alone, was even more so. She wanted to rush over when she heard the gunshots at first, but she heard gunshots from different directions before she took a few steps. Natasha ran back and forth in the different gunshots, really confused. The only information she knew at this time was that these elites gathered from all over the world, like street thugs, seemed to be fighting aimlessly, and a posture of seeking death set the whole forest on fire. Natasha didn't understand what happened to them. She looked at her reconnaissance equipment again and again, but the state of no signal had lasted for a long time. Maybe someone destroyed the signal. She could understand this, but the current situation really made her puzzled. In the jungle, the stupidest behavior is nothing more than a gunfight. There is no other benefit, except exposing yourself and wasting bullets. What's more, these people who were involved in the gunfight were obviously not in a desperate situation, but were bloodthirsty. Natasha shook her head and decided to save herself first and then figure out what was going on. However, more than an hour passed. The intelligence agency that was blocked by the armed organization at the beginning had been wiped out. They opened their eyes and looked at Lan Shan falling to the ground, and they didn't understand what happened until they died. The director of the intelligence agency didn't understand why everyone was fleeing to the west, but his companion who had been in front of him with his back suddenly appeared behind them. The bullet from his companion instantly shot through his heart. Before he fell, he saw his companion's confused expression. For a moment, everyone seemed to be trapped in a folded space, a chaotic crowd, and the bullets, that gradually became out of control due to fear and chaos, remained unchanged. Swords have no eyes, and bullets are ruthless. The bullets and various grenades that shuttled through the mountains and forests have harvested countless lives. There are only a few remaining troops that have not been completely wiped out. The best intelligence personnel and agents in the world are fighting in a melee, and they have lost all their reason. At this time, the people of the French intelligence agency have been defeated, and their leader is running and shouting, "Stop! We surrender. Don't shoot anymore. Don't shoot." As soon as this voice came out, it slightly awakened the reason of some survivors. Many people who were fighting stopped and saw that the remaining 3 or 2 people on the French side had raised their guns and surrendered, their hands raised high above their heads. This non-threatening scene made everyone calm down a little. William, the 7th agent of Mi-8, also calmed down a little at this time. He couldn't help but think back. Just a few hours ago, wasn't he eager to leave with his colleagues? Weren't they afraid of Professor Lin Feng, and also had to be wary of the Chinese army coming from the east? Why did they fight here? And most of the opponents were even like them, eager to leave this organization. Looking at the enemy in front of them who was holding a gun, and looking at them, their faces were also confused. What is going on? William lowered his head in thought, and when his eyes accidentally swept across a bush beside him, his whole body froze. William, the 7th agent, turned pale and said with some trembling, I remember this place. It's where we disguised ourselves just now, not far from where Professor Lin Feng was standing at that time. But we have already walked a long way. Why are we still here?" His companions also changed their faces when they heard his words, and they said, "That's right. It's here. This is the footprint I left at that time. The shape is unique to our bureau, and the shoe size is the same." "Yes, and why did we suddenly fight? Why don't I have any impression?" The words of his companions made William's face even uglier. He thought to himself, "It's like a devil dragged them into the web of war." At this time, their ceasefire also made Lin Feng, who was standing aside, pay attention again. Originally, he thought that these people would keep fighting, but he didn't expect that there would be a country that really surrendered first. But it's no big deal. As long as these people can't get out of this formation, the situation will not change at all. Chapter 102 Fatal Situation. As long as he wanted, their own will was like bubbles, which would be blown away. Moreover, he had not really ended yet. If he could really relax his muscles, it would be quite good. At this time, the people from the French intelligence agency had walked out of the bunker and slowly walked to the west. They kept raising their hands in surrender, and everyone was watching them from behind the bunker. No one fired, no one spoke. In a strange silence, everyone fell into deep thought. If surrender is useful, should they follow suit? Will everyone leave here with their hands raised next? But now those who have witnessed how Lin Feng made the mercenary leader disappear want to leave, and others who have not witnessed it are still eager to come in. For a while, this small area is like a besieged city, and everyone is in a state of anxiety. Moreover, after all, they have just fought, and many of them still have several lives on their guns. It is not so easy for them to go back now. On the battlefield where all kinds of thoughts intersected, the French raised their hands. Although their bodies were trembling slightly, they had already walked a distance and their hearts were beating violently. Victory is just ahead. Perhaps they will be out soon. It seems that surrender is still useful. At this time, Agent Number 7 William knew clearly that, even if the French could leave, they would most likely be buried here until all the others disappeared. It seems that they should not have come to China so easily to catch Lin Feng. Once the gunshots were fired, there was no way out. No. Can't give up. Just when William wanted to be discouraged, a ray of sunlight passed through the shade of the trees and sprinkled on his face. He thought of his hometown. For a moment, the desire to live was infinitely magnified in his heart, and he decided to give it a try. Wait. He shouted, and everyone's eyes turned from the French to him. The French turned pale, and they didn't know what this wait meant. Their guns had been thrown behind them. Are they really going to be forced into a desperate situation? Question mark? William's clear voice rang out in the deadly battlefield, and he asked, "How many of you here want to go back? Want to leave here and return to your own country?" In the silence, there were countless shaken eyes. William suppressed his violent heartbeat. His breathing was rapid, but he still tried his best to make his voice clear. Didn't we want to leave here before? Because we saw the great ability of Professor Lin Feng. That is not something we can resist. Even if all of us here are added together. No. Even if all the countries behind us are combined. No one can compete with the power of Professor Lin Feng. Isn't it the best choice to leave here now? Why are we still fighting here? You are lying. Professor Lin Feng is in your hands. You just lied to us and made us run for nothing. You can go back and collect the bounty. A leader of an armed organization who did not see Lin Feng's golden pupils said loudly. The blood stained his beard red, and his twisted face was a pair of distrustful grey pupils. Enough. You are the ones who are blinded by the bounty. Think about it. Lin Feng is a living person. If it is as you said, then why do so many of us have to run away? We are not all in the same group. Anger made William lose his previous demeanor, and he cursed at the man in a vicious voice. The leader of the armed organization fell silent after hearing this. Indeed, if someone really caught Lin Feng, they should have fought first. But it was indeed after they arrived that the large-scale fight began. But I don't believe that Lin Feng is so powerful as you said, the leader of the armed organization said, and his momentum had weakened a lot. William did not intend to refute Lin Feng's strength with him. After all, more than half of the people present saw it with their own eyes, not to mention that, even if there was no scene seen today, the previous live broadcast on the moon was enough to let everyone know that Lin Feng was a legendary figure unique in the world. Not to mention the relationship between Lin Feng and the prehistoric continent, and his mysterious identity. William thought about it and shuddered. Anyway, didn't you notice? Most of us were fleeing, but we were somehow dragged into this place and started a gunfight. If we hadn't been suspicious of each other, we might have safely walked out of this forest, William said, feeling a little weak. He didn't quite believe his last sentence, but he still wanted to be more optimistic. At this time, many people also echoed, "Yeah. Let's leave here quickly. What's the point of fighting any further? We don't have Lin Feng here at all. Don't go crazy. Let those who want to leave go first. We can be checked." For a while, the majority of people wanted to leave, and the wave-like shouts echoed in this forest, where gunfire had just been heard. The desire to live overwhelmed everything. William saw that the situation was set, and said, "Let's leave together." "Okay. Let's go." Everyone packed up their stuff, and helped up their injured companions. They moved excitedly, wishing they could fly away. At this time, a man stood up. "Do you really think you can get away?" A weak word pierced the momentum that everyone had put together like a needle, and everyone looked towards the source of the sound. A dark-faced man had red eyes. He held his teammate's favorite gun in his hand, and his body trembled like an autumn leaf in the breeze when he stood up. "It's Mark. What do you mean? If you don't want to leave, stay by yourself, and don't affect us." As everyone was talking, Mark saw everyone's intense reaction, and seemed to be discouraged, and said nothing more. His words made William panic. An intuition from the bottom of his heart told William not to ask any more questions, but fear still did not overcome curiosity. He looked at Mark and said gently, "Mark, what do you mean by that?" Mark, who was caught, shook his head, and forced a bitter smile. "Have you not thought about it? Those who sacrificed, do they deserve to die? We also went deep into the mountains and forests for the mission, but as soon as we came in, we were caught in the fire without doing anything. Why did you shoot at us? Didn't you want to escape? I just don't understand why the shooters now say that they are the ones who want to escape, but we innocent people have already lost our lives. Moreover, we are fighting on a large scale here. The original confidential mission and secret infiltration have become so high profile. Can we still leave the country? Even if we leave this mountain, we can't go back." His words made everyone fall silent again. William was already dizzy at this time. The chaotic situation and the fact of mutual harm, no one could explain it clearly. What they saw could not be shared by those who came later, but everyone was indeed inexplicably caught in the firefight. At this time, the situation was like a paste, and no one could make sense of it. Chapter 103 Big Misunderstanding. Speaking of Huaksha, don't you have any doubts? We have been here for 3 or 4 hours, but Huaksha has not shown up yet. I suspect that this is a trap set by Huaksha. A trap to trap all of us. Trap? William looked at Fred, who was speaking. This man was an old agent of the European Union with a long career. As early as when he was training, he was already a top agent. Fred lowered his eyelids, and his pale face was now even more bloodless. Don't you have any doubts? How could such an important person as Professor Lin Feng disappear just like that? Let's not talk about his own intentions, just say that to Aksha. Can he disappear alone? His words made everyone shake their heads, and they couldn't help but regret that they accepted this mission so quickly. If they had known this earlier, they would never agree to sneak into Huaksha, let alone agree to capture Professor Lin Feng. But life is hard to buy early knowledge. In silence, Fred spoke again. Let's go. There's no point in talking more. Staying alive is the most important thing. His voice seemed to have aged a lot, and everyone calmed down in his voice. There was no more quarreling, and even suspicion became a waste of energy. Everyone gathered together, wanting only to escape from this hell. But at this time, those who were alone were not so lucky. Natasha Romanoff, the top agent of the United States, and also the most senior agent, was in confusion. She was obviously eager to get closer to the destination, but she passed by the same place several times in a row. What is going on? Agent Natasha, who had always been calm and composed, could not help but doubt her life at this time. She looked straight at a jagged rock in front of her. She was very sure that she had passed it 11 times after the first time. Now, she felt that her eyes were a little blurry when she looked at the rock. She was sure that her eyesight was fine, but what on earth was going on? Question mark? She was almost driven crazy by this dilemma at this time, but the gunshots around her were still ringing in her ears. Dangers were lurking around her, but she was like a little white rabbit, trapped and unable to escape. Is this the magic of China? Natasha's panic rose in her heart. She rarely set foot in the territory of China, but at this moment, she was really afraid of this land. When she tried countless ways, and finally found that she had no way to escape, she really went crazy. Natasha's head was dizzy, and she could hardly stand still. Who can come help me? She murmured, and her dazed eyes lost their previous sharpness. Natasha couldn't help but think of the feeling when she watched the live broadcast of the moon landing before, which was a feeling of powerlessness to compete with the world. At this moment, a figure passed by her. Natasha's eyes flashed. Is it him? Why is he here? Is he trapped? Or? Natasha's eyes followed Lin Feng's back, and she almost instantly determined the reason why Lin Feng was here. No wonder Lin Feng disappeared under the eyes of the whole world. It turned out that he was trapped here. She herself was more than sure of the power of this spell, and it was no wonder that Professor Lin Feng was trapped here. Natasha's eyes regained their sharpness, which was the eyes of a hunter, when he saw his prey. She quietly stepped forward and approached Professor Lin Feng. At this time, she didn't know that the prey she thought of was also showing its claws to her. In Lin Feng's eyes, Natasha was no different from a rabbit that jumped into his trap without any preparation. He didn't even need to fight her seriously, and he could make her jump into his trap willingly. Lin Feng was calm at this time, and Natasha could only fall into his trap unknowingly. At this time, Natasha had walked behind Lin Feng. As long as she stretched out her slender and powerful arms, she could trap Lin Feng in an instant. She shouted, "Professor Lin Feng." Natasha's confident voice sounded a bit sexy to Lin Feng. He suppressed the teasing in his heart and pretended to be cold suddenly. He shrank his neck, turned around, and his face was full of exaggerated surprise. He and Natasha looked at each other, and Lin Feng pretended to see her for the first time, breathed a sigh of relief, and said, "Hello." After saying that, he pretended to look at Natasha with some doubts, as if he was thinking about how to ask his next question. Seeing Lin Feng like this, Natasha's confidence returned. At this time, she almost forgot the shock she had just received in the forest. She said calmly, "Hello, Professor Lin Feng. I'm Agent Romanov. I came here because I received the information that you were trapped, so I was specially ordered to pick you up. Maybe you don't know yet, the moon landing has been successful. As the biggest contributor, the international organization attaches great importance to your safety. But I didn't expect you to be trapped in this chaotic space. At present, the cause of this is not very clear, but my mission is to escort you out first, and it won't be too late to find out the cause later." Natasha's words made Lin Feng smile. It's not his fault that he found it interesting. After all, as the initiator of this chaotic space, the person who was trapped here and confused was still thinking about escorting him out immediately. He felt like a cat pretending to be a mouse at this time. He found it very interesting to see Natasha trying very hard but knowing nothing. Lin Feng nodded, showing an expression of sudden enlightenment, and said, "Thank you very much. I really want to leave here immediately." But, Lin Feng showed a hesitant and fearful expression again. He looked at Natasha and asked, "But what's the situation with all these gunshots around? Are there other people here besides us?" Natasha was stunned for a moment, and a trace of panic flashed across her face. She thought to herself, Professor Lin Feng is really lucky. He didn't know that these people came for him, but he didn't run into any of them. What is the probability of this? In addition, are the so-called top agents in the world so bad now? Question mark? But, she was also lucky to be the first to meet Lin Feng. She smiled and said, "The situation is very complicated now. Many people from various countries and forces are eyeing you. This is why I'm here." Natasha had a sincere smile on her face, and she was slightly proud in her heart. There are actually many ways to interpret what she said, but she is confident that Lin Feng will understand that she is here to help him. At this time, she didn't want to delay any longer, so as not to cause trouble. Since she found Lin Feng, she should take him back to report as soon as possible. She turned forward and looked around to explore the way. The dense leaves of the forest seemed to be opening their bloody mouths to her. All the mysterious intersections seemed to be ways to escape, but based on her experience, none of them were. A deep fear surged in Natasha's heart, and she couldn't help but think of an absurd assumption. One more thing. Although she found Lin Feng, what if she couldn't take him out? Chapter 104 Uninvited Guests. "Follow me, we'll go out now," Natasha said as if she was deceiving herself. Her voice reached Lin Feng's ears behind her, like a child saying something innocent. Lin Feng smiled, and there was even a hint of sympathy in his eyes when he looked at her back. Now all the international and various forces agents and mercenaries have been fooled by his formation. And Natasha, who was alone, knew nothing about it. This is indeed a very interesting thing. Lin Feng was even a little anxious to end everything as soon as possible. Time passed by minute, and everyone didn't know that the dawn they thought was just the halftime break in Lin Feng's plan. And the second half is about to begin. Zhanghe East Suburb Chen Haitian was leading a team to investigate in the east suburb. Just now, they found abnormal radiation. He contacted everyone he could contact as soon as possible, but no one could tell him what the abnormal radiation was. Just as they were spinning around like headless flies, an unknown research institute quietly sent a research report, which clearly listed the analysis of various data. He patiently read the report that he did not understand very well until he saw the final conclusion. The abnormal data and situation involved in this case are currently only studied by Professor Lin Feng in the world. We suspect that the wormhole is caused by the distortion of space-time, but the specific cause is still under analysis. When Chen Haitian saw this, he immediately knew that the matter was more difficult than he expected. He immediately contacted the satellite command center in the military region. This matter is of great importance and may involve the distortion of space-time. The search and rescue work must be carried out cautiously. Once Professor Lin Feng is found, he must be brought back immediately. At this time, the development of the matter has exceeded everyone's expectations. Professor Lin Feng's disappearance is not only linked to the strange disappearances that occurred in the world at the same time, but it is also very likely related to the distortion of space-time. What is going on behind this? Does it have anything to do with our moon landing? Did the birth of Lord Yang Jian affect the magnetic field on Earth? When the astronauts come back, based on the data they bring back, maybe things will become clear. But this matter needs to be solved now, not to mention that Professor Lin Feng is involved. Without him, how can we carry out a series of subsequent work? Maybe this matter is related to Professor Lin Feng. How is this possible? But that's Professor Lin Feng. It should be said that everything is possible. The crowd fell into a brief silence. There are more and more mysteries about Lin Feng. People also like to associate many mysterious events that happen inexplicably with him. In fact, although there is no news about Professor Lin Feng yet, everyone has an inexplicable certainty in their hearts that is Professor Lin Feng must be fine. Although everyone can't say the specific basis, and they don't mention it on their lips, in people's hearts, Lin Feng has become synonymous with omnipotence. However, this incident really has nothing to do with Lin Feng. This is an overlap phenomenon that only occurs once in tens of thousands of years. The overlap phenomenon leads to spatial anomalies. This is a time when the space distortion is the most serious, and Lin Feng's disappearance happened at this time. With such a coincidence, it is no wonder that everyone suspects that it is related to Lin Feng. In any case, everyone is anxiously waiting for Lin Feng's return. I don't know if it is because everyone has developed a heartfelt dependence on Lin Feng over time. When Lin Feng is not around, people feel like they have no backbone and are always uneasy. Not to mention, this phenomenon of spatial distortion has appeared again. Although some missing persons have returned, their descriptions have made the case even more confusing, and it is of no help in finding those missing persons who have not returned. United States Loki, holding the cosmic cube in his hand, landed in a remote town in the United States with great confidence. Malekith, the Emperor of the Dark Elves, landed here with him. Malekith was in a good mood to come to Earth, not to mention that this is the place where the Ether is about to descend. The 9 kingdoms are now meeting in the atrium, and the energy of the Ether is released from here. The destruction of the 9 kingdoms is a foregone conclusion. Malekith said with certainty, believing in the power of the Ether. No race can resist the power of the Ether, even the most powerful race. When Malekith was fantasizing about the destruction of the 9 kingdoms, Loki showed a cunning look behind him. The destruction of the 9 kingdoms? How is it possible? He certainly would not let this guy destroy the 9 kingdoms. He was just using him temporarily. Then how do we find the Ether? Loki asked in a sincere manner. Malekith turned a deaf ear to his words and walked straight forward. The area in front of him had just been blocked by the United States. This is a place called Stonehenge, and lying there quietly is the Salisbury stone ring. This place you see is where we used to make dark energy. I didn't expect that after so long. It's still the same. The door to the Ether will start from here. Malekith said slowly, and his footsteps followed him forward. Loki behind him hesitated. According to his idea, he didn't want to conflict with humans in advance, and everything was based on finding the Ether. This is why he brought Malekith here alone. But, Loki gritted his teeth. Since the conflict is inevitable, it doesn't matter. As long as he can find the Ether, he is willing to give it a try. After all, he has the cosmic cube in his hand. If the monkey and Tathagata Buddha on the earth appear, the best strategy is to run away. Natasha was still trapped in the mountains at this time. For some reason, Lin Feng's footsteps behind her suddenly stopped. Natasha looked back and saw Lin Feng looking intently to the east. His focused and serious expression at this time couldn't help but make Natasha's heart flutter. Is this man, the man who was trapped in the mountains and was at a loss and only knew to follow her pace? You, Professor Lin Feng, what are you looking at? Natasha asked. With her eyesight and hearing, it was impossible for her to not notice anything unusual, but she squinted her eyes and looked in the direction where Lin Feng was looking for a long time, and she didn't know what Lin Feng was looking at. Our old friend is here. Lin Feng smiled and continued. And brought a new friend. Lin Feng's words did not make Natasha understand at all, but made her mind more confused. Is this the difference between Professor Lin Feng and ordinary people? He can always see things that ordinary people can't see. Or has he been trapped for a long time, and like herself, he almost has hallucinations in front of his eyes? Natasha shook her head and decided not to entangle anymore, but quickened her pace. Professor Lin Feng, let's go quickly. It's better to leave before dark. Otherwise I'm worried that you won't be able to bear walking at night. Lin Feng almost laughed out loud after hearing what Natasha said. He raised the corners of his mouth, but said, okay. The premise is that you can get out. Chapter 105 Lin Feng's performance. Natasha had completely relaxed her vigilance against Lin Feng. At this moment, Lin Feng was like a treasure in her pocket. She believed that her biggest difficulty at this moment was not how to control Lin Feng, but how to get out of this mountain forest. As long as she could get out, Lin Feng would go back to the United States with her. So she didn't notice Lin Feng's abnormality at all, but just explored the next path in the jungle. In the silence, Lin Feng also lowered his head and thought about the two uninvited guests. Loki came with Malekith, which meant that the plot of Thor 2 had begun. How far was he from harvesting the next wave of points? An unprecedented opportunity appeared in front of him. As long as he could grasp it, harvesting huge points was not a dream. At this time, Lin Feng's mind had drifted to how to entertain these two guests well, and he didn't have much interest in the little farce at the moment. Let's end it quickly. The chaos in this mountain forest continued and would reach its maximum in the next hour. All places covered by the formation, no matter how far away, are equivalent to Lin Feng's territory, and he has the power to control it at will. For example, at this moment, Lin Feng smiled slightly and looked at Natasha's back. She was looking around and confirming the road ahead. The next second, the French agent who was running madly to the west rushed towards Natasha. Where is the way out? Why do I feel that we are getting closer and closer to the west? If we keep walking like this, I even suspect that we will accidentally walk in front of Professor Lin Feng. Shut up. Don't say these things. The voice of the French agent shocked Natasha, who was trying to find a way. Hasn't there been no one around here? Even the sound of gunfire has not been heard for a long time. What is going on? Question mark? However, as a top agent, she immediately reacted from the shock, looked at the source of the sound, and shouted, "Who's there?" The French agents who were fleeing in panic had been tortured by this devilish forest during their escape, so they almost subconsciously dropped their guns as soon as Natasha questioned them, raised their hands above their heads, and said, "We just want to escape from this forest. Don't shoot. We have no hostility." After they said that, they didn't even dare to look at Natasha's face in front of them and fled in the opposite direction without looking back like a frightened rabbit. Natasha stood there in a daze, looking at the guns they threw on the ground, and countless question marks exploded in her heart. What is this situation? I thought the inevitable bloodbath was over just like this. What on earth are they here for? Question mark. Natasha knew nothing about what those agents had experienced before. They were all top elites from various countries. After all, those who were sent to capture Lin Feng must be the best and experienced. But they have been on the brink of life and death again and again, not to mention seeing Lin Feng's terrifying golden pupils with their own eyes. Under the inhuman and overwhelming deterrence, they have long lost their fighting spirit. Staying alive is their only remaining sanity and persistence. Even Natasha, confused, could not explain the strange behavior of the French agent. She kept holding her gun to fight back, but the enemy had already escaped without a trace. Only their scattered guns on the ground were still reminding Natasha that what happened just now was not a dream. Lin Feng felt more and more interesting in his heart. He looked at Natasha's stunned face with a playful look and asked softly, "Was there anyone just now? Why did they disappear? Are they your colleagues?" Natasha was awakened by Lin Feng's words. She shook her head subconsciously and said, "No, these people are not my colleagues." She doesn't have such colleagues. She continued to explain. "Do you remember when we first met, I told you that there were other forces eyeing you, and they wanted to kidnap you?" Natasha's mind was clearly completely confused by what had just happened, but she still had to explain to Lin Feng to prevent him from getting suspicious. A deep fear and uneasiness rose as her doubts deepened. What on earth was going on? This was too weird. First of all, why did those people suddenly appear, as if they had fallen from the sky, and she hadn't noticed anything unusual before that? And why were those people so panicked? Were they also trapped here? What went wrong? Natasha felt like she was covered in a fog at this moment, like a blind person with open eyes. All the answers seemed to be written in front of her, but her inner fear and fragility could not support her to uncover even a corner of the answer. Lin Feng looked at Natasha, who seemed to have fallen into panic, with interest, and he decided to add fuel to the fire. But, what they said just now was strange, wasn't it? Why did they say they had no hostility? If their target was me, then you are their enemy, right? But why didn't they take a closer look and just ran away? Or is there something unknown here? Lin Feng's words made Natasha secretly regret. Just now, she was in a mess, and when she heard Lin Feng's question, she just wanted to fool him as soon as possible, but she didn't expect that there were so many loopholes. Originally, with Professor Lin Feng's IQ and insight, even she didn't think she could hide it from him. She was just relying on the information gap to temporarily fool Lin Feng to follow her. Of course, she could also use force to make Lin Feng surrender directly, but in this strange forest, she was even a little bit unable to protect herself, and it was meaningless to create complications. Natasha lowered her head in silence, her face kept changing, and she realized that she might have been silent for too long, so she could only shake her head and say that she was going to give up. The situation has changed a bit now, and I don't know what happened to them. Anyway, let's get out of this forest and get rid of the current predicament first. Natasha was telling the truth. She thought to herself that, as long as she got out of the forest and got the help of her colleagues, she would not need to give Lin Feng an explanation the moment she and Lin Feng got on the helicopter. Lin Feng could clearly judge Natasha's self-deception through her expression. He curled his eyes and looked at Natasha with a smile, but his steps did not move at all, and he continued to ask. But, they said we should leave quickly, but why do I feel that we have been walking for almost an hour, but we have been going around in circles? Lin Feng's words made Natasha's eager steps freeze on the spot. She had already noticed something that had been worrying her for a long time, but Lin Feng's words made her even more confused. Just when she was trapped in the maze of her mind, Lin Feng's next words were like a light, lighting up a little direction for her. Have you heard a rumor? Someone in the local area mentioned this forest. Lin Feng lowered his voice, and a chill in the deserted forest seeped into Natasha's heart. Lin Feng began his deception. Chapter 106 Hypnosis. You know what? Natasha's eyes widened as she looked at Lin Feng. After all, Lin Feng was a professor. He not only had a rich knowledge reserve, but also had strong insight. What he said must have great reference value. Perhaps the strangeness of this forest would soon be solved. Natasha looked at Lin Feng expectantly. At this moment, Lin Feng was like a life-saving straw. Every word and sentence he said was precious in Natasha's mind. Lin Feng suppressed his smile. He frowned deeply, put his finger on his chin, and pretended to think. He slowly said, this mountain area has a long history. It is said that in ancient times, there lived an immortal. The immortal could penetrate the clouds and fog, call the wind and rain, and his magic power was very strong. But one day he disappeared, and the forest where he lived was used as a pilgrimage site by later generations. Natasha was stunned by Lin Feng's words. She pricked up her ears to listen, fearing that she would miss something important. Natasha whispered softly, it turns out that this land has such a magical past. Her rejection of this place was not so strong. Yes, not only that, Lin Feng said, deliberately paused at the critical moment, and looked at Natasha, seeing that she was indeed listening attentively, looking very pious. Lin Feng felt funny in his heart, and the corners of his suppressed mouth rose slightly, and he continued. Not only that, this is also a place of truth and courage. Ah, truth and courage. Natasha, who had always been calm and composed, shouted like a little girl when she heard this. If what Lin Feng said before still had some cultural differences, she needed to concentrate on understanding and digesting it, then what he said now was like a movie trailer of Heo Lei Wu, which sounded very familiar to her. Ahem. Lin Feng coughed subconsciously, and he suddenly felt that he had fooled too much. But he didn't think too much. Looking at Natasha's appearance, she should believe whatever he said at this time. Yes, the locals told me that being trapped by this land is normal. Do you know how they get out of here when they encounter this situation? Natasha's mind was focused on Lin Feng's words at this time. She wanted to know how to get out of here. What do you rely on? Truth and courage? Natasha felt that if she just kept asking questions, she would look like an idiot, so she deliberately inferred it. Almost. Lin Feng nodded. His affirmation was like a huge compliment, which made Natasha feel excited and nervous. Looking at Natasha's red cheeks due to excitement, Lin Feng smiled and gave the final answer. That is love. As long as you love this land under your feet, the way out will naturally open up for you. However, Lin Feng's words crashed Natasha's CPU. Love? You can only get out if you love this land. What does this mean? Natasha's expression fell into Lin Feng's eyes. He smiled and explained. Because this mountain is a famous mountain in the local area, it is the kind that outsiders know little about, but the locals worship it. So if outsiders come here, they are very likely to be trapped. It can be regarded as a protection mechanism of the land itself. Is the land of China so magical? Natasha couldn't help but say. If she didn't have a deep understanding of China when she watched the live broadcast of the moon landing before, but now, after experiencing it personally, she really believes that the ancient wilderness of China is not a legend. It really deserves to be a country where gods and men once emerged. Natasha sighed sincerely. For a while, there seemed to be some subtle changes in my heart. Just like raindrops falling into a pond, before I can catch that subtle emotion, it has already merged into my heart. Haha, but I think it's a bit strange. After all, you are a foreign agent, and it's normal that you don't have such deep feelings for the local area. But I'm a native Chinese, and I have feelings for every plant and tree in the country. Why can't I get out? Lin Feng said with a smile. Natasha looked at Lin Feng. His jaw was firm, his eyes were curved, and he looked at the forest in front of him with a calm expression, without any fear or complaint. Looking at Lin Feng like this, Natasha couldn't help feeling guilty. Maybe she had implicated him. No, it must be him. Not only was she a foreigner, but she was also an agent who wanted to forcibly bring Lin Feng, the leading scholar in China, back to the United States. Maybe she couldn't get out here because Lin wanted to stop her. No wonder it was like this. When a spiritual mountain forest wanted to stop something, what else could she do? And between the lines of Lin Feng's words, he revealed that he was so patriotic. Adding up these things, Natasha's defense line in her heart was almost broken. She couldn't help but blurt out, "It's all because of me. It must be me who implicated you. Otherwise, maybe you could have gotten out a long time ago." Natasha lowered her head and spoke softly. Lin Feng looked at the top of her head, and his body couldn't help but tremble from trying to hold back his laughter. It's so funny that the trapped people apologized to the instigator. He suppressed his smile, frowned slightly, and continued to pretend. "Although I don't think so, but I can't rule out this possibility. According to what you said, if this is really the case, why don't we act separately? If I can really get out, I will rush back to save you." Lin Feng's words brought Natasha, who was still in guilt, back to reality. She frowned, was silent for a moment, and refused directly. "No, this is too dangerous. What if you meet those people just now? Protecting you is my highest mission. I can't let you walk alone in this forest." Natasha finished speaking in one breath, her chest heaving slightly. She slowed down and thought, is this the right thing to do? If Lin Feng goes out, he might meet the Chinese army, then he will never have another chance. It can even be said that forever. And she was right. If Lin Feng met those shrimp soldiers and crab generals just now alone, it would be a bit dangerous. Whether from emotion or reason, her decision was right. Then what should we do? Lin Feng pretended to be a little distressed. He had known for a long time that Natasha would not agree, but if it was really that easy to agree, then what was the point? "I can use hypnosis." Natasha took a deep breath and made a decision. Now she could not afford to hesitate for a moment. She made up her mind and continued. "I know hypnosis. As long as I hypnotize myself from the bottom of my heart and tell myself that I love this land deeply, I think maybe we can get out." "Good idea," Lin Feng exclaimed. "You are so amazing. You are worthy of being an international agent. You are so omnipotent. I admire you." Natasha was a little confused by Lin Feng's compliments. The hesitation in her heart just now was thrown behind her in an instant. "Okay, then I'll start." Chapter 107 A Good Show. Natasha closed her eyes and thought silently. As long as she completed the hypnosis and went out with Lin Feng, she would be successful. Natasha was even slightly excited when she thought about being able to win over such a reliable and unobnoxious talent like Lin Feng to her camp. She stood still on the ground, cleared her mind of all distracting thoughts, and was about to start self-hypnosis when Lin Feng's voice came. Wait, let me say it, you read it with me. After all, I'm Chinese, I know how to say it. Natasha had entered a semi-hypnotic state at this time. Lin Feng's voice seemed to come through a layer of thick fog. She did not open her eyes and nodded based on her subconscious judgment. Looking at Natasha like this, Lin Feng's mouth curled up and his smile gradually deepened. He said in a low voice like a bewitching voice, I love China deeply, I love every piece of land in China deeply, and I admire every monument in China. Natasha followed, I love China deeply, I love every piece of land in China deeply, and I admire every ancient monument in China. Lin Feng smiled and continued, I love China. I love this peace-loving country. This beautiful and peaceful land is what my heart desires. Natasha seemed to be getting into the groove, and she continued as soon as Lin Feng finished the last word. I love China. I love this peace-loving country. This beautiful and peaceful land is what my heart desires. I'm willing to sacrifice my life and freedom for China, and I'm willing to do my best to defend the peace of China. 100 years later, I will sleep forever in this land that I love. Lin Feng's last words were a little heavy, and Natasha seemed to have noticed something. Her eyelashes trembled twice, and the sound of wind blew through the leaves of the forest, bringing a wisp of cool breeze with the fragrance of the pine forest to them. At this moment, Natasha spoke. I'm willing to sacrifice my life and freedom for China, and I'm willing to do my best to protect the peace of China. 100 years later, I will sleep forever in this land that I love. Her voice was solemn and serious. At the end, a teardrop crossed her eyes. Lin Feng looked at the crystal tears that crossed Natasha's cheeks and knew that he had done it. The gunshots gradually subsided. Lin Feng realized that the fleeing teams were getting bigger and bigger. Perhaps they were happy to think that they could escape. But Lin Feng looked at Natasha, whose tears were not dry, and whispered, if you meet, what a wonderful situation it should be. Let me watch another good show. The world's top agents came because of Lin Feng, and now they are united because of Lin Feng, including various hostile countries. Such a rare scene can really be called a miracle. They worked together to bypass many roadblocks and explored countless roads, but still could not find a way out. With no signal from any device being restored, these agents from various countries were almost on the verge of collapse. Countless attempts had failed, the connection with the outside world had been cut off, and they had to face the pain of losing their companions. The atmosphere in the escape team was very low, as if it was about to explode. Is this our final destination? No, even if I die, I want to die in my hometown. No one here will know us at all. Besides, we came to China secretly. I believe our superiors will not admit their actions to China in order to bring back our bodies. William's words made everyone's emotions even more depressed. They wanted to refute, and the eagerness to refute had already rushed to their throats, but they could not find words to refute. They had to admit that what William said was the cruelest fact. If they were buried here, their country would not recognize their identities. Perhaps the final explanation for their identities would be a few foreign criminals, stowaways, etc. Just when their emotions reached a low point and some of them even lost the courage to move forward, the scene in front of them was quietly changing. The light from the sky poured down on them. William, the leader, could not help but cover his eyes with his hands. His mouth opened in disbelief. This is an open space. Fred. We have come to an open space. Fred was at the end of the team. Like the others, he heard William's excited voice and walked to the front. People gathered together and looked at the open space in front of them that was flooded by the sun. At this time, they were still in the shadow of the jungle. The shadow and the sunlight of the open space separated by a clear boundary. Fred said excitedly, we have hope. This is a place we have never been to before. We are finally not going around in circles. Everyone echoed, yes. We can finally get out. Quick. Let's go. I think I'm going crazy if I keep walking in the woods. Brothers, our prayers are effective. Many people even sobbed. In the long and confused journey, the mind bears huge uncertainty. Finally, a little light came, and people couldn't help but burst into tears. After all, this is not an ordinary mission. If it were any other mission, no matter how hard or difficult it was, it would definitely be able to get through it. Because those missions followed common sense, they knew how to deal with them. But this time, they first saw Lin Feng's golden pupils, then experienced the chaotic rain of bullets, and kept spinning in this jungle that was like a devil's cave. This inhuman torture made the devil training they had experienced in the past seem like child's play. Let's go. The people in the escape team united as one, and walked forward with expectation. Their hearts beat with their steps, and they firmly believed that the way out was ahead. Fred and William walked side by side. The two elite new and old agents looked at each other and smiled tacitly. They looked at the jubilant companions in front of them, and they were very pleased. If they could take them out together, it would be a heroic deed. Fred and William walked out side by side at the end of the crowd. They walked out of the shadows and into the light. The sun slanted down, and they squinted their eyes comfortably, feeling the long lost light. For some reason, everyone stopped in front of them. Perhaps they were waiting for the two leaders. Fred and William quickened their pace to not let everyone wait too long. However, just as they pushed aside the team members standing straight and walked to the front, their steps stopped. The pupils trembled in their eyes at the same time. And in the pupils full of fear, the reflection of a person was reflected there. They finally understood why the people who were eager to leave suddenly stopped, and they also understood that this open space did not represent any hope for them. But, the end. Chapter 108. Lin Feng is here. The person standing in front of them was none other than Lin Feng. Lin Feng, even two simple syllables, was enough to stir up the storm in these people's hearts. Not to mention that he was standing in front of them at this time, only a dozen meters away. However, it was not just Lin Feng who was waiting for them. Natasha opened her eyes almost the moment she heard their voices. Hypnosis takes some time. She was still in a deep sleep, and there was only one China in her dream. At this time, she heard a noisy sound, and the sound seemed to be approaching them quickly, constantly amplifying. Natasha, who seemed to be in danger, looked at the source of the sound suddenly. Although she didn't know why those people were stiff, and looked at them palely, and she didn't know why the agents from various camps gathered together, she didn't have time to think, and her hand was already on the gun. She was a little nervous. Although she was well trained, there were too many people. One after another, people emerged from the jungle, and they stood still the same when they saw them. Why are they so strange? What is going on? At this moment, two familiar faces also walked out of the crowd. It was Fred and William, and they froze in place when they saw him, and their reactions were no different from those of the others. Natasha? Fred called out Natasha's name in surprise. He was as surprised to see Natasha here, next to Lin Feng, as Natasha was to see him. She was actually standing next to Lin Feng. As a senior agent, Fred certainly quickly determined the purpose of Natasha's coming. She must be here to capture Lin Feng in the country just like them. But why was she standing with Lin Feng and still safe? Lin Feng couldn't have been seduced by Natasha's beauty? Question mark? But when he said this, Fred himself didn't believe it. That was Lin Feng. At this time, Natasha had just woken up from hypnosis, and the chaotic and weird situation in front of her was far beyond her understanding. The clearest voice in her heart told her that these people were going to attack Lin Feng. Natasha drew out her gun, aimed at Fred in front of her, and said, "I'm here, don't even think about getting close to Lin Feng." At this time, Fred and William, who were opposite Natasha, were not much more confused than Natasha. Their bodies couldn't help but tremble, and all their minds were attracted by Lin Feng, who was smiling at them from behind Natasha. Lin Feng's smile was like Mona Lisa, as if it had countless meanings, but in the eyes of the two at this time, they only saw the deterrence of the strong. They looked at each other, and saw the strong desire to survive in each other's eyes. The huge fear had overwhelmed them, leaving them without any fighting spirit and blood. Fred and William nodded and shouted, "Go." No matter if they could get away or not, they could run for a while. If they continued to look at Lin Feng, they would definitely be scared to death. The two of them were like the leaders. When they shouted, the other dozen people behind them, who dared not breathe, ran back in a swarm. Run. Lin Feng, it's Lin Feng. Mom. I want to go home. In an instant, more than 20 people shouted and rushed back regardless of anything. Behind them was not some scourge, but a confused Natasha and a still smiling Lin Feng. Natasha looked at these people in confusion. Even though she had experienced many big scenes, she was really confused when she encountered such a scene. She felt like she had taken some hallucinogenic drugs at this moment. The elites of various countries were running away like lunatics. How could she say that she was not dreaming? What's going on? Natasha said to herself. She didn't expect Lin Feng beside her to answer her. After all, this was a matter between their agents. Lin Feng didn't even know that he was being targeted by these agents, so how could she expect him to answer her questions? Sure enough, Lin Feng was also confused. He shook his head and said, I don't know, did they eat mushrooms? There are no mushrooms here. No matter what happened to those people, since they had already run away without a trace, Natasha's attention to them also dissipated. At present, the most important thing for her is to get out of here as soon as possible. Not only for herself, but also for Lin Feng. The key is to complete self-hypnosis. Natasha found a smooth rock and sat on the ground. She closed her eyes, slowly slowed her breathing, and gradually entered the hypnosis mode again. The words Lin Feng said in her ear seemed to be planted in her cerebral cortex. Once she eliminated the distracting thoughts, they surged up in her subconscious like a tide. She almost couldn't help but say, I love China deeply, I love every piece of land in China deeply, and I revere every ancient monument in China. Her words reverently and attentively echoed in Lin Feng's ears. Lin Feng closed his eyes and leaned against a tree behind him. His smile deepened as Natasha kept repeating the words. That's right, that's it. It's estimated that Natasha will wake up soon. When she opened her eyes, she must have been a completely new Natasha. The wind blew the leaves, and the light slowly tilted as time went by. Just when Lin Feng was even a little sleepy, Natasha's voice came. Professor Lin. Natasha's shout seemed to contain some full emotions. Unlike the previous official and impartial voice, it was more humane, and even reminded Lin Feng of the appearance of progressive young women in the movies of the last century. Lin Feng listened to this voice that was different from the past, and looked at Natasha. Natasha was indeed not that Natasha. Now in front of Lin Feng was a completely new Natasha. Her eyes were like stars, shining with the trembling of her long eyelashes. That was the look that only people with ideals could have. Natasha stood up. Her expression was gentle and firm, and she looked at Lin Feng with a very enthusiastic look, as if she was always ready to set out to complete her mission. Looking at such Natasha, Lin Feng smiled. Now, we can set off. As soon as he finished speaking, Lin Feng untied the formation in the mountains and forests. At the same time, officials from the Chinese army also rushed over. They were a little anxious because they did not find any trace of Lin Feng, but before they could further investigate Lin Feng's whereabouts, a sneaky figure attracted their attention. That's not right. We have sealed off this area. The people around here will not go up the mountain at this time. Who is it? It must be those foreign spies. Catch them. With the order from the commander, the soldiers had already controlled the sneaky figure. This person was one of the few mercenary leaders who survived. When he saw the Chinese army, he was so scared that his eyes widened. It's not me. It's not me. Lin Feng is here. Run away. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 109. You're telling me this is a foreign elite? The soldiers looked at this man's crazy appearance, looked at each other, and were confused for a while, but the Lin Feng mentioned by this foreigner made them very concerned. Before they could analyze this man's abnormality, the Chinese army found other people rushing here one after another. The first of these foreigners were William and Fred. They were kneeling on the ground, holding the dust and fallen leaves on the ground in their hands. Their faces were full of tears, and their expressions were indescribably excited and enthusiastic. The soldiers did not expect to have such an unexpected harvest, and for a while they ignored their strange behavior and reported, "Captain, many foreign agents have been found. However, their behavior is a bit weird, as if they have been greatly stimulated." Some of them shouted Lin Feng. Maybe they know the whereabouts of Professor Lin Feng. Fred and William were quickly brought to the company commander by the soldiers. Because their mental state at this time was very abnormal, they didn't even need to be tied up. They followed the soldiers obediently as soon as they were escorted. Company Commander Zhu looked at them. The excitement on the faces of these foreigners and the scars on their bodies made him frown. Do they know the whereabouts of Professor Lin Feng? What happened to make these people so distracted? They are so well equipped that they are not ordinary criminals. But even so, they still have wounds of varying severity, which shows that they have experienced a fierce battle. Moreover, there are so many foreigners speaking various languages, and they actually gathered here. What other reason can they have except for Lin Feng? But in addition to finding these foreigners, they also found many corpses. No one can say for a while whether Professor Lin Feng is safe or not. Thinking of this, Company Commander Zhu was extremely anxious. He ordered others to continue the emergency search and rescue, and he faced the two people and shouted loudly, "Tell me quickly, who are you, and what are you doing here?" Fred stuttered in Chinese with a heavy accent. We are not together. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Fred of the European Union, and this is Colonel William of Mi-8. We came here for Professor Lin Feng, but now we know we are wrong. Please let us go." William's Chinese is not as good as Fred's, but he has guessed what Fred said, based on a few words and Fred's behavior and expression. He nodded sincerely beside him. No matter what, as long as he can leave this damn place and leave Professor Lin Feng, he will do anything. Captain Zhu, who had a very dignified expression, didn't know how to react for a while after hearing their words. He stood there silently, digesting the thoughts silently in his heart. Are these people really agents from various countries? But why are they so embarrassed now and want to leave so badly? What happened? Don't lie. You must answer truthfully. When we find Professor Lin Feng's trace, you will all be sent to await trial. The two shouted excitedly. No, don't. Captain Zhu thought they wanted to resist arrest and snorted coldly, but he heard Fred say loudly, "Don't wait any longer. Send us there now." Captain Zhu, who was about to threaten them with a few words, was stunned. What was going on? It was the first time he heard someone rushing to the prison, as if they couldn't wait a moment. And they were two top foreign agents? Did they look like agents? Captain Zhu couldn't help but think of a possibility. Could they be afraid of Lin Feng? At this time, the voice of the intercom interrupted his thoughts. "Captain, we found Professor Lin Feng." "What?" Captain Zhu was overjoyed, and just as he was about to say something, the intercom reported again. "There is a foreign woman next to him." Captain Zhu was slightly startled and didn't understand what was going on for a while, but he immediately said, "Hurry up and bring Professor Lin Feng back, and the woman next to him." "Professor Lin Feng, is he not injured?" Captain Zhu hesitated for a moment, but still asked carefully. "Don't worry, Professor Lin Feng is fine." A happy voice came from the intercom. When Captain Zhu heard this, his heart finally settled down. Okay. Captain Zhu sighed and cast his eyes on the two agents in front of him again. He had been worried about these foreigners because of what happened in the jungle, so he didn't even dare to ask directly about Professor Lin Feng's whereabouts, for fear that the two foreigners would say something that would make him despair. But now that Professor Lin Feng was safe and sound, Captain Zhu also thought calmly. Looking at the clothes of the two people in front of him, Captain Zhu had already believed their words about their identities, but if they were both elites, then why were they so out of control at this time? Could it be related to Professor Lin Feng? The more Captain Zhu thought about it, the more he felt that his speculation was very reasonable. After all, Professor Lin Feng was safe and sound now, so it was very likely that the abnormalities of these people were related to Professor Lin Feng. Although Captain Zhu couldn't figure out how Professor Lin Feng did it for a while, that was Professor Lin Feng. He was the initiator of the live broadcast of the moon landing, and even Lord Yang Giant knew his name. What else could Professor Lin Feng not do? Question mark? Captain Zhu's eyes swept over the two people in front of him again. A lieutenant colonel and a colonel were now pale and trembling as they sat on the ground. For some reason, they no longer had the excitement they had when they first met them. Instead, they were filled with a strong sense of panic. What were they afraid of? Just as Captain Zhu was thinking, a voice came from the woods. Captain Zhu raised his head and went over. The one who was leading the charge was indeed Professor Lin Feng. He was calm and composed, forming a strong contrast with the foreign agents. The soldiers took him as the center and carefully surrounded him like the moon surrounded by stars, fearing that he would make a mistake. Professor Lin Feng. Captain Zhu couldn't suppress his excitement and walked quickly to Lin Feng. Finally found you. At this time, Lin Feng's existence was a walking miracle. It was a great honor to see him in person, not to mention that his safety was unknown after he disappeared. Lin Feng looked at Captain Zhu, who was a little excited, smiled, stretched out his hand to Captain Zhu, and said, "Thank you so much for coming here." Captain Zhu held Lin Feng's hands tightly with both hands and said repeatedly, "What are you talking about? The most important thing is that you are safe." Originally, I thought that, even if Lin Feng was not a little arrogant, he would at least have a temperament of keeping strangers away. After all, his achievements are there. But to Captain Zhu's surprise, he was so approachable. At this time, he recognized Lin Feng even more in his heart. Captain Zhu said to the soldiers behind him, "Quickly fire a signal flare and let the helicopter come over. The most urgent thing now is to take Professor Lin Feng away from here." Captain Zhu did not forget the two foreign men beside him who were trying their best to shrink their bodies and not be noticed. He asked Lin Feng, "Have you seen these two people?" Chapter 110 Professor Lin Feng is a real man. Lin Feng raised his lips and nodded. Even Captain Zhu was confused. Could it be that his guess was true? These two top foreign agents who came to capture Professor Lin Feng were so afraid of him. If something really happened, it must be no small matter. Captain Zhu couldn't help but feel annoyed when he saw the two men. He shouted, "Hey, raise your heads. What are you doing being so timid?" Fred and William could only raise their heads slowly under Captain Zhu's scolding and the urging of the soldiers behind them. However, their heartbeats exploded when they saw the corner of Lin Feng's clothes, and they lowered their heads again. Now, no matter how the soldiers urged them, their heads remained motionless, hanging down on their chests like ostriches, even lower than before. What on earth is going on? Captain Zhu's doubts deepened. At this moment, the sound of the helicopter propeller sounded, and a strong wind blew towards them, driving countless leaves from the trees. Captain Zhu subconsciously stood in front of Professor Lin Feng. He watched the helicopter land smoothly, and his heart gradually settled down. "Professor Lin Feng, you go back first. There are still important things waiting for you to decide." "Okay." Lin Feng didn't say much, and climbed the escalator under the escort of the soldiers. Natasha watched Lin Feng's movements, and fell into confusion for a while. Her eyes followed Professor Lin Feng closely, and she heard their conversation clearly just now. She obviously couldn't stay here any longer. After all, the Chinese army had already arrived, and she had no chance to take Lin Feng to the United States. But why did she follow here all the way? And even when she saw Professor Lin Feng walking towards the helicopter, she subconsciously wanted to follow him. Obviously, she knew her identity clearly. She was Agent Romanov of SHIELD, and she came here to bring Lin Feng back to the United States. But she doesn't want to leave here now. This land is closely connected to her. She is attracted by the ancient history and the warmth of the people on this land. Why should she leave? But if she doesn't leave, what identity should she continue to stay here? Can she see Professor Lin Feng again? Just as she was hesitating, a man's voice came from beside her. "Aren't you going to catch up? Professor Lin Feng is leaving soon." Natasha looked at Captain Zhu beside her and saw that he was looking at her with some concern. She nodded subconsciously, and under the impetus of this sentence, she got on the escalator of the helicopter. Shortly after Natasha boarded the plane, the helicopter took off. Captain Zhu looked up at the helicopter disappearing into the sky, praying in his heart that Professor Lin Feng would be safe and sound, and the foreign agents behind him finally sighed together. This living ancestor is finally gone. Lian Cheng. Long before the helicopter landed, the two sides of the helipad were full of people. Everyone was looking forward to it, looking up at the distant sky enthusiastically. There was no plane in the sky at this time. After all, this was a secret special zone. If there was one, it would be abnormal. The scorching sun hit the faces of the senior officers surrounding the apron. Their dark foreheads were covered with sweat and even flowed into their eyes, but they did not blink, as if they had returned to the days of new soldiers. Because they had just received an emergency notice that Professor Lin Feng was about to come back. They are coming. A huge shout broke out in the crowd, and cheers followed one after another. Everyone watched the helicopter slowly fly from a small black dot in the sky until it landed on the apron. Chen Haitian was at the front of the crowd. He excitedly watched the hatch open and several soldiers walked out. They were divided into two rows and stood opposite each other at the exit of the helicopter, each with their heads held high and their faces proud and proud. The soldiers' expressions infected the generals who had been waiting for a long time. They held their breath and stared at the hatch. The next moment, Lin Feng slowly walked out of the hatch. The crowd applauded at the same time. The sound of the helicopter propellers did not cover up the applause from the heart of the crowd, but the applause became even more enthusiastic. For a moment, the applause was like a wave, sweeping the tarmac. Chen Haitian also clapped vigorously in the crowd. His thick palms were already red, but it did not affect his strength to continue clapping. Professor Lin Feng is back. Is it still far from solving all the problems? However, just as his eyes were fanatically chasing Professor Lin Feng, a woman's figure flashed from behind Professor Lin Feng. The graceful figure under the black tights, the flaming red hair. It was Black Widow. It was Black Widow, the top agent of SHIELD. How could that woman appear here? And beside Lin Feng? Chen Haitian's face, which was originally red due to excitement, immediately turned pale. He immediately pulled out his gun and aimed at Black Widow, and the people from the National Security Bureau also pulled out their guns. For a moment, the originally joyous welcoming atmosphere disappeared. People who didn't know what happened stopped clapping and looked at the serious looking people holding guns. Why were they pointing their guns at that woman? Who was that woman? Natasha Romanov. Put your hands up. Why are you here? Chen Haitian shouted, his hand holding the gun trembling slightly. It was not easy to welcome the return of Professor Lin Feng. What was going on? At this time, the onlookers heard Chen Haitian say the name, and their expressions relaxed. Most of them were senior military officers, and they knew a lot about this name, but they had heard a little bit. The first spy of the United States. This is the #1 dangerous person. How could she appear on the helicopter and stand next to Professor Lin Feng? At this time, the soldiers lined up at the helicopter entrance also raised their guns to Natasha. They all looked extremely nervous. They didn't know the identity of this woman at all. Just now on the plane, they treated her as Professor Lin Feng's friend, and her attitude was also gentle and polite. Who would have thought that she was actually a bad person? Natasha, who was surrounded by guns, didn't know how to explain. Perhaps no one would believe her thoughts if she said them out loud. She, a senior spy in the United States, actually fell deeply in love with China. The sense of belonging given to her by this country is something she will never be able to break in her life. That feeling is like a traveler who has been wandering for half a lifetime has a home. But, a spy in the United States for many years said these words. Even she herself didn't believe it, let alone want to convince these Chinese officers. Just when Natasha was at a loss, a gentle voice came. Put down the gun, this is one of us. Lin Feng's words made Chen Haitian suddenly stiffen. He stood there in a daze and didn't react for a while. The others were also confused, looking at Lin Feng in front of them with blank faces. One of us? What does this mean? The multiple explanations behind this made everyone imagine a lot. Professor Lin Feng is a real man. These 7 words plus a huge bold exclamation mark were written in everyone's mind at once. Chapter 111 Lin Feng returns. Chen Haitian sighed silently, and when he saw Natasha's face full of emotion, when she heard Lin Feng's words, he knew that his guess was almost right. Professor Lin Feng is too amazing. He is proficient in academic research, and even in love life. Sure enough, truly talented people are good at everything. It is impossible to be a one-sided talent. However, Chen Haitian, who has experienced many ups and downs, naturally knows what his most important task is at this time. He walked towards Lin Feng. Professor Lin, I'm really sorry. We have been looking forward to you for a long time, but the one next to you. We were really surprised when we saw her at first. Please don't mind. Facing Chen Haitian's embarrassment, Lin Feng just smiled slightly. Let her work with Tony Stark and others. We have such precedents. Lin Feng said lightly, and just as he was about to walk forward, he turned around and asked Natasha, is this arrangement okay? Natasha behind Lin Feng was stunned and nodded. Of course, no problem. She never thought that Lin Feng would come back to ask her. After all, this arrangement was the best for her. It should be said that it couldn't be better. Natasha's answer was naturally within Lin Feng's expectations. Natasha's hypnosis was said by Lin Feng word by word, and Natasha repeated it word by word. He would never doubt Natasha's feelings for China at this time. What's more, even if there is no hypnosis, can Natasha go back? He didn't use any of his abilities on Natasha, but he had already naturalized her. The gap between their abilities was too great, and Natasha couldn't take him away. Her final outcome would be either death or naturalization. After all, her abilities were indeed very strong, and this time she illegally invaded China. Letting her go back would undoubtedly be letting the tiger go back to the mountain. Therefore, going to the Avengers in China was indeed the best arrangement for her. They will take you there. There are many people like you there. From now on, you will all be part of China. Part of China. Natasha was slightly excited by Lin Feng's words. She nodded and went to find the staff. Chen Haitian witnessed this scene, and his expression at this time can be described as dumbfounded. Are you kidding? Question mark? Is the woman in front of him the Black Widow? Question mark? Who is this innocent and cooperative woman? Chen Haitian's eyes secretly glanced at Lin Feng, and his admiration for Lin Feng increased. But this time, it was in a completely different direction. But, how did Professor Lin Feng know Tony Stark's arrangement? Just as Chen Haitian was thinking, Lin Feng asked in a low voice. Director Chen, what happened when I was away? Lin Feng directly got to the point, which made Chen Haitian put away his gossiping thoughts just now. He looked serious and nodded slightly. Professor Lin, we have successfully landed on the moon. I believe you also know that it is estimated that the astronauts will be able to return safely in more than 10 hours. But, we have discovered that a large number of disappearances occurred on Earth at the same time. The data shows that the disappearances are likely related to the distortion of time and space, but some data are far beyond the current level of scientific research, and you still need to take a look. Lin Feng smiled and said slowly, speaking of this, 2 uninvited guests have landed on Earth. It is estimated that there will be another large-scale invasion of aliens on Earth in the near future. What? Another alien is coming? Or a large number of aliens? Chen Haitian tried his best to suppress his volume and sighed. Yes, and this time, it is much more dangerous than the last time. Lin Feng said in a low voice. His words made Chen Haitian freeze in place. The last time had already made him tremble with fear, and this time is even more dangerous. Question mark? What kind of devastating situation will it be? What should I do? But before he could be shocked, Lin Feng had already walked forward and spoke. I have to go back to take care of some things. Please give me a ride. It was news time, and every household was eating and watching the news at home. Since the live broadcast of the moon landing, some young people have also started to watch the news on time, thinking that they might get some latest news about Professor Lin Feng. In this era of rapid change, great changes are happening every day. The Chinese people are still in the excitement of watching the live broadcast of the moon landing, so they habitually stare at the news anchor's every move on the screen. Suddenly, the anchor's strangeness attracted everyone's attention. Her calm face suddenly froze, and her eyes stared at the teleprompter in front of her. Then her face lit up, and she looked at the camera and said excitedly, "Dear viewers, now an urgent message. The relevant departments have contacted Professor Lin Feng. He is safe and sound. Please don't worry. He is on his way back to Huaking University." Even a well-trained anchor couldn't help but get excited when seeing this message. Her words quickly ignited everyone in the world through the screen. Sure enough, I knew that Professor Lin Feng was just taking a simple vacation. Professor Lin Feng is back. Those missing people will be found soon. I want to know when Professor Lin Feng will give his next lecture. I can't wait to know more about Lord Yang Jian. Everyone was discussing it privately and expressing their feelings on the internet. For a while, the searches for the 4 words Professor Lin Feng once again reached a new high. But why has Professor Lin Feng been missing for so long? What happened? Why can't people around the world find any trace of him? For someone like Professor Lin Feng, there must be thousands of ways to avoid being found. Let's not waste our brain cells. It's more important to think about what Professor Lin Feng's next plan is. I dare not even think about what kind of miracle we will see next. When will Lord Yang Jian come to the world? I look forward to his early arrival in China. The scene will be spectacular. Yes, without Professor Lin Feng, how can we know the information of ancient figures? Soon, the news that Professor Lin Feng had returned and was about to return to Huaking University spread from China to the whole world. Many news stories featured Professor Lin Feng as the protagonist, and various articles and posts were written. Even if the content was the same, it still attracted everyone to like it and comment below. Everyone watched the media review what Lin Feng had done in recent days, and they felt that this scholar on Earth was also a true god. Whether it is the sudden appearance of the Monkey King, or the shocking world of Buddha Tathagata, or the world-renowned Erlang's engine, it can be said that, if there was no Professor Lin Feng, even if these gods appeared in the world, no one would know their origins. But Professor Lin Feng has built a bridge between mortals and gods. Such a person is simply the grace given by God to this era. Not to mention, not only is Lin Feng unique in the field of history, he has also made breakthrough achievements in science and technology. Such a person, except Lin Feng, who else in the world dares to be compared with him? And such a person happens to be a native Chinese, which makes all Chinese people proud from the bottom of their hearts. However, on the other side of the ocean, the face of the United States is not very good. Chapter 112, S.H.I.E.L.D. lost both his wife and his army. At this time, the atmosphere in S.H.I.E.L.D. was very tense. Director Pierce and Nick Fury stared at the signal that was suddenly cut off in a daze, and for a moment they could hardly believe what had happened. What is going on again? Pierce's frantic voice came, and he almost had an ominous premonition at the first moment. And all this proved to him that the defection of Natasha, the top agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., was true. They really lost both the wife and the army this time. Originally, they swore that Natasha would never betray S.H.I.E.L.D., but they didn't expect that not long after sending her, not only did not receive any news, but the last intelligence they got was that Natasha was recruited by China. Question mark? This absurd news that seemed like fake news was actually true. Facing the decisive signal cut off by Natasha, Pierce and Nick Fury deeply doubted their lives. At the same time, intelligence organizations in other countries were in chaos like them. They thought that the mission might not succeed, but they didn't expect it to be so tragic that all the agents sent out would never return. This is a day that can be recorded in the history of intelligence organizations around the world. Of course, for China, it is a just and comprehensive victory. The secrets known by those agents are enough to destroy a country. Most of them who survived at this time are living in China's prisons. Under the heavy blow, they no longer have the blood and spirit they had before. Many people are even waiting for China's inquirers in prison, hoping to tell everything they know and leave a good impression on Professor Lin Feng. Of course, Lin Feng will no longer pay too much attention to them, but his huge deterrence is still deeply in the hearts of the agents. I'm afraid that they will have to accompany them to sleep for the rest of their lives. At this time, the people in the intelligence organization still know nothing about Lin Feng's power. They were shocked. What on earth is going on? I can't believe that Lin Feng returned, as if nothing had happened amidst the siege of agents from all over the world, while all the agents we sent out never returned. Didn't Lin Feng disappear? Shouldn't he be alone? Don't tell me that Lin Feng alone could deal with all the top agents in the world. What on earth did he do? Quick, call Huaxia immediately. We can't let Huaxia have a bad impression of us because of this. We must find a reasonable reason, as soon as possible. The top government officials around the world were greatly shocked at this time, and smart countries were already on their way to call Huaxia. Huaxia has proved to the world again and again that its current strength and status cannot be violated by anyone. Before taking action against Huaxia, you must consider whether you have the corresponding strength and courage. Many countries are now in a state of tension. Opportunities are fleeting. You must seize the opportunity to establish good relations with Huaxia as soon as possible, otherwise, it may be too late. Chen Haitian, who was envied by intelligence agencies all over the world, was not in a good mood at this time. Although he arranged to send Professor Lin Feng to Huaqing University as soon as possible, he was not clear about the reason why Lin Feng was in a hurry to go to Huaqing University. Could it be that Professor Lin Feng was going to hold an emergency lecture? Chen Haitian thought about it, and all kinds of thoughts were spinning in his mind, but there was no conclusion. At this time, a call came in from the intelligence agency of Eagle Country. Chen Haitian was annoyed to death and frowned when he saw the call. He answered the call and said business-like, "Sorry, no comment. Thank you for your concern for Professor Lin Feng. He is of course doing well now. Also, please do not call me easily. According to the procedure, you should call the embassy. Our colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will be responsible for the connection." However, the Eagle Country was not unhappy with Chen Haitian's tone. They immediately said, "Director Chen, we called to tell you something. We sincerely propose cooperation with you. We have a person with special abilities here. I believe you will be interested in him. We are willing to study with China." Chen Haitian felt very interesting. With his understanding of the other side, this was already a very sincere performance of this. It can even be said that they are trying to please China. Of course, Chen Haitian would not accept it. He could not affect the overall situation of China's revival because of a little bit of profit there. What's more, China now has Professor Lin Feng. He believes that Professor Lin Feng has his own plan, so Chen Haitian cannot easily agree to anything. And they already have a Black Widow here. It is estimated that the surrender of other people with special abilities is only a matter of time. After Chen Haitian made up his mind, he spoke slowly. "You can contact the Ministry of Foreign Affairs directly. There are staff there to connect with you. As for me, please don't call me easily," Chen Haitian said, and hung up the phone immediately without waiting for the other party to respond. He snorted coldly in thought. Even if the Eagle Country wants to cooperate with them, it is also a joint research. It seems that their sincerity is still not enough. What's more, Chen Haitian doesn't trust the Eagle Country very much. They have tripped them up more than once or twice. China has grown up, but these Westerners still seem to be naive. The office building of the Eagle Country Intelligence Agency. A senior agent held the phone in one hand, and fine beads of sweat had seeped out of his forehead. The phone that had been hung up on the other side was beeping. He turned around and looked at the chief helplessly. Chief Jike's face was pale at this time, and his clenched hands were faintly blue. He didn't look at the agent. The beeping sound that continued to come from his ears sounded very harsh. He said in a low voice, "Put down that damn phone first." The agent hurriedly put down the phone when he heard it. Jik sighed and asked, "What's the situation at Stonehenge? Have the missing people been found?" As soon as he spoke, the agent answered neatly, "The tourists who disappeared not long ago are still being searched for, and no traces of them have been found so far. The anomaly is still expanding, and the relevant data is very consistent with that of China, but the scale and frequency of spread are much larger than those of China. However, the scope of spread has now slowed down and tended to be static. I don't know how it will change in the future." Jik's face turned pale at this time, and he couldn't help but regret it. Now the whole world is helpless against the anomaly of Stonehenge, except for Professor Lin Feng. If they had not chosen to illegally invade China and wanted to capture Professor Lin Feng back, but instead applied to China for assistance, would Professor Lin Feng be on his way to help them now? Today's Stonehenge is like a huge hidden danger. It is difficult to say when it will continue to spread, and no one knows where it will spread to. What should we do? Chapter 113 The Power of Ether. Jik couldn't help but blurt out in front of his subordinates. The blows he had suffered during this period of time had made it impossible for him to maintain his demeanor and composure as a leader. He continued to speak frantically. William was actually locked up. Now his life or death is unknown. There is not even a news. Now this situation has happened again, and the attitude of the Chinese side towards us. Jik frowned. He made up his mind and said, "The only one who can solve the Stonehenge now is Professor Lin Feng. Contact the Chinese side immediately. We must invite Professor Lin Feng at all costs." Sir, what if Professor Lin Feng can't solve this problem? Agent Harris asked on the side. He was the second agent after William. At that time, he was dissatisfied with the fact that the boss only let William lead the team. Now, he was more than just glad in his heart. However, none of them had specific information about Lin Feng's ability. He asked this question, firstly to express his doubts, and secondly to show off in front of the boss. The boss really smiled, and his usual insidiousness was revealed in his smile. If Lin Feng can't solve it, that's right. We have not only dragged Huazaya into the water, but also made Huazaya lose its credibility in front of the world. Isn't that good? As the head of the Eagle Country's intelligence agency, GK has always considered the interests of the highest level of his country. If the Stonehenge continues to spread and Huazaya can't solve it, it will only affect the residents in the surrounding area, and it won't have much impact on them anyway, because they have properties all over the world. As soon as GK said this, Harris immediately understood. He immediately judged that the core of this mission lies in Huazaya and Lin Feng. Harris smiled meaningfully and said, "Understood, sir. If something goes wrong, the one who needs to be responsible for this matter is of course the powerful Professor Lin Feng, and of course, Huazaya behind him." GK laughed out loud after hearing Harris' words. That's right. Now there are many ignorant netizens in the country who clamor to like Lin Feng and Huazaya, and they also use this to put pressure on the government. It's about national security, we can't ignore it. But GK remembered something, coughed a few times, and instructed. You still have to be very respectful when you come into contact with Lin Feng. We know too little about him at present. If you can take the opportunity to get more information from him or get on good terms with him, it is also necessary. Understood, sir. Stonehenge at this time, Loki and Malekith were diligently exploring the road with the cosmic cube. They moved forward along the expansion of the space-time rift, not knowing that the impact they caused in Stonehenge was actually being used by some people. Can we really get there if we keep going like this? Even Loki couldn't pretend. After searching for so long, he still patiently asked, after all, so much time has passed, will there be some changes? Malekith noticed Loki's impatience. He snorted coldly and glanced at Loki. Are you questioning me? This, of course not. It's just that your understanding of the other is beyond my imagination. Compared with you, I'm like an ignorant human. Loki noticed Malekith's dissatisfaction and made up for it. As he spoke with flowery words, he thought secretly in his heart, when the goal is achieved, the survival of Malekith and the Dark Elves will be decided by him. His words sounded quite useful to Malekith. Malekith's face looked a little better and he explained, you are right. I can feel the breath of the ether standing here. Its power is everywhere, and we are all deeply bathed in it. As for the rest, I have my own ideas. Loki nodded silently, pretending to be sincere and confident. If it weren't for the powerful beings that suddenly awakened on Earth, if it weren't for their power being too difficult to contend with, he wouldn't have to rely on the power of the Dark Elves. If he wanted to completely conquer the Earth, he had to rely on the power of the Dark Elves, and using Malekith to find the ether was a step he had to take. They searched for a while, and Loki became more patient. At this moment, Malekith stopped and said loudly, we are here. The ether is just ahead. Loki's mind was moved, and he immediately used the cosmic cube to feel it. There was nothing in the space in front of him, so why did Malekith say that the ether was in front of him? Was he lying to himself? Just as he was thinking this, suddenly, a surge of energy like a huge wave rolled towards him. No. Loki was terrified, and quickly dodged backwards. His face was pale and his body was shaking uncontrollably. Is there really such a powerful force in this world? Even if Loki had the cosmic cube in front of the ether, he was as lame as a child holding a toy that did not belong to him. The shock of the ether seemed to have gathered the energy of the entire universe, making Loki unable to recover from the shock for a long time. Malekith sneered at Loki like this, and when he had seen enough of Loki's stupid look, he said, don't be afraid, unless you are occupied by the ether. Loki did not comment on Malekith's comfort. He calmed down and expanded the space crack in front of him. Odin's decaying breath can no longer be concealed. I can clearly feel his weakness. Malekith said in a high voice. His words reached Loki's ears, causing his expression to change. Loki wondered for a moment, does this mean that he can return to Asgard? But before he could think, Malekith had already walked forward. Looking at the space crack in front of him, that was the direction where the ether existed. Loki followed without hesitation. Although Odin was weak, he was still not his opponent. What's more, he came to Earth this time and witnessed the incomparable ancient power. If he could convince these people to help him, then even if he wanted to dominate the entire universe, it would not be difficult. Not to mention Asgard. Thinking of this, he had already followed Malekith's steps into the space crack. Although the space exchange would have the influence of gravity, he only needed to adapt slightly. At this time, his attention was completely attracted by the huge statue in front of him. This is. Malekith did not look at Loki, and his voice came with his footsteps. Odin and Buri. They stole the ether from us by despicable means, and sealed it here. Since then, we, the Dark Elves, have lost our source of power, and have fallen into desolate days. The passage of time has weakened Maleski's tone, but the hatred for revenge is growing in the deepest part of his heart. Maleski said lightly, no matter how long it has been, revenge on them will never be erased from my heart. And the day of revenge, I believe, will come soon. Loki's face changed, and he lowered his head slightly, afraid that Maleski would see it. But Maleski didn't care about his expression at all. He had already walked between the two huge sculptures. Chapter 114 Emergency Call. The weapons in the hands of the two huge statues were crossed, and a cold light flashed on the weapons, indicating to the newcomers that there was no way out. Under the crossed weapons, there was a bottomless abyss at the feet of the huge statues. In front of him was a bottomless canyon, and above him were crossed weapons. A heavy and oppressive atmosphere came over him, but this did not affect Loki at all. He saw something in the middle of the crossed weapons almost at a glance. There was a stone at the intersection of the intersecting weapons. There was a slight crack in the middle of the stone, and a strange red light shone from it. Although the red light was very weak from the small crack in the stone, it seemed to have a strong bewitching effect, like the eyes of an ancient mythical beast. As soon as Loki saw the light, he could not take his eyes away. The red light seemed to have a power that could suck people who saw it into it. Just as Loki was absorbed by the light, the voice of Malekith came from the side. Although Odin and Bli are very despicable, they are still quite imaginative. They actually sealed the ether here with the Rainbow Bridge. No wonder we haven't found it for so many years. As he said this, he stretched out his palm to touch the crack in the stone that was oozing red light. And the red light, as if it had life, meandered along Malekith's palm. Just as the brighter and brighter red light enveloped Malekith's palm, his eyes radiated scarlet color. Malekith's face was distorted, and the voice that he tried to suppress still flowed out because of pain. But even in such pain, Malekith's eyes were very fanatical, as if they were about to burn, and the red light in his eyes became brighter and brighter. Even if this process is extremely painful, as long as we can get the powerful power of the ether, it's all worth it. Loki looked at Malekith wrapped in red light, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. He finally found the ether as he wished. The power in front of them is enough to affect the entire universe, otherwise Odin and Buri would not be so afraid. With such power, even the ancient existence on Earth cannot contend with it. At the same time, Chen Haitian was standing with Thor. Before leaving, Professor Lin Feng told him that if he wanted to know the reason for the distortion of time and space, he could ask Thor. Anxious Chen Haitian found Thor almost as soon as he hung up the phone call from Eagle Country. What he didn't expect was that Thor really knew, and it can even be said that he knew almost nothing about this matter. You mean, this matter is related to the God's domain? The 9 kingdoms of the God's domain are connected in a line, and this situation will occur now. Thor nodded and said, that's right, so you don't have to worry too much. This is something that happens every few thousand years, but the impact will be completely eliminated in about a month, and you don't have to do anything. Chen Haitian finally put his heart at ease when he heard Thor say this, but he immediately thought of Professor Lin Feng, and he couldn't help but be surprised and surprised. Professor Lin Feng is too amazing. How did he know that Thor knew all this? How could he know about the things in the God's domain? Could it be that he is related to the God's domain? But Professor Lin Feng also knows about the things in the ancient times, which even Thor doesn't know. Professor Lin Feng, Who are you? Chen Haitian sighed in his heart. However, every time he met with Professor Lin, it was really hasty, so he has not had a complete conversation with Professor Lin so far. When all these things are over, he must have a good chat with Professor Lin. Although Professor Lin may not be able to tell him, or he doesn't think, that Professor Lin can tell him all his secrets. But it is also good to be able to talk to Professor Lin, and have more contact with him at close range. But now the most urgent task is to report this matter to the relevant departments and let them know that there is no need to panic. Chen Haitian thought about it, and felt a little confused. Why did the Eagle Country call the embassy and other departments again and again, after being rejected by him? Don't they know that this matter is not that serious? Chen Haitian couldn't figure it out, but the Eagle Country was so eager to contact Professor Lin Feng that he was a little uneasy. In any case, we must be vigilant when it comes to anything involving Professor Lin Feng. Professor Lin Feng has just been found, and his safety cannot be compromised. At this time, the gate of Wielding University was already crowded with people. From a distance, the grey-haired professors were mostly old professors over half a century old, and there were many academic masters among them. Not only professors from Wielding University, but also professors from the neighboring Yanjing University came. As soon as they received the news that Lin Feng was returning, they contacted Wielding University and rushed to greet him. So when Lin Feng entered the door, even he was surprised by the spectacular scene in front of him. The old scholars over 50 years old looked at him eagerly and said excitedly, "Professor Lin, you are finally back. I have read your research. If you are not a genius, I really can't think of such a solution. With your achievements, the Nobel Prize in Physics is already in your hands," the professor said, but his voice became smaller. With Professor Lin Feng's current achievements, the Nobel Prize in Physics is nothing. With Professor Lin Feng, the history of China has been extended thousands of years, not to mention his contribution to the world. That is a contribution that is enough to be recorded in the annals of human history. The Nobel Prize is not a matter of 100 years, but Professor Lin Feng's name can be passed down for tens of millions of years. President Zhang of Yanqing University, who had been standing in the crowd, stood up and said impatiently, "Professor Lin Feng, if you have the opportunity, can you come to our place to give a few lectures? It's next door, very close." "Old Zhang, why are you asking for so much? Professor Lin Feng hasn't given a few lectures at Wielding yet." President Zhao Sangayang, who had been standing next to Lin Feng, couldn't help but say, "Although they are all brother institutions, there is also competition among them. What if Professor Lin Feng is poached? Professor Lin Feng is now like an international superstar, so he must be careful to guard against some people with ulterior motives." "Old Zhao, you are too narrow-minded. Even if Professor Lin Feng is a professor at your school, in the final analysis, Professor Lin Feng still belongs to the country." As soon as President Zhang of Yanqing University said this, the professors of Yanqing University agreed. "That's right. Professor Lin Feng belongs to all of China and even to all of humanity. Don't try to take him for yourself. We also want to ask Professor Lin Feng for advice." Lin Feng looked at the scene in front of him and felt a little amused. He hurriedly helped President Zhao out. "It's okay to give a lecture. We are all brother schools." President Zhao didn't say that I can't give it at Yanqing University. We can take our time. After hearing what Professor Lin Feng said, President Zhang and the professors of Yanqing University all had bright eyes and were excited. Zhao Sangayang also breathed a sigh of relief and cast a thankful look at Lin Feng. At this time, Professor Fang Minimum hurriedly pushed through the crowd and walked to Lin Feng, saying anxiously, "Professor Lin, there is an urgent call from the army. Chapter 115 want Lin Feng to take action?" Fang Minimum's words made everyone stand still, and their eyes all turned to Lin Feng, who was surrounded by the crowd. Lin Feng looked calm and just nodded slightly. "Okay." Lin Feng's tone was very calm, as if the emergency call from the army was within his expectations. "In that case, let's go back first. Professor Lin Feng must have a lot of work to deal with now, so we won't bother him for now," President Zhang of Yanqing University said when he saw this. Although he was a little reluctant, Professor Lin Feng agreed to give a lecture at Yanqing University today, and his attitude was so serious, so he thought he would definitely go. thinking that the day when Professor Lin Feng would give a lecture at Yenching University was just around the corner, President Zhang felt that he had already gained a lot from this trip today. So the people of Yenching University said goodbye and left with satisfaction. Lin Feng took the phone from Professor Fang Minimum and said lightly, "I'm Lin Feng." A gentle and elegant voice came. "Hello, Professor Lin Feng. I'm Huang Lang from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I called you suddenly because of the Eagle Country. They have been contacting us, hoping to promote cooperation." Oh. Lin Feng raised his lips. His little interjection made Huang Lang, a colonel on the opposite side, panic for a moment, and he said hurriedly, "Of course, we didn't agree to them, but we still want to ask your opinion first. The reason why we didn't refuse outright is because the other party promised us something." Lin Feng was silent and thought silently. He had known for a long time that Loki and Malekith had to do something when they came here. The leakage of space energy caused by the Eagle Country was naturally related to the cosmic cube. But now it was still a small fight, and it was not his turn to appear. Lin Feng was now thinking about how to arrange Yang Jian to come out. The scene had to be grand, and it must cause more shock to everyone. So he had to wait for Malekith, who had been possessed by the power of Ether, to fight against himself. Lin Feng said, "Eagle Country dared to offer us cooperation when sending agents to illegally sneak into China. The benefits they offer should be considered sincere." This, Lin Feng's words made Huang Lang stunned. He didn't expect Professor Lin Feng's words to be so straightforward, and he didn't expect that at this time, Professor Lin Feng would give priority to the interests of China, rather than the situation where he was almost threatened by the agents. Huang Lang was moved by Lin Feng, but he didn't say it, but replied, "Actually, their benefits are not sincere. After all, they have illegally invaded China before, and more importantly, they actually tried to attack you. With such a criminal record, the conditions they offer are nothing. We are too impatient, but fortunately you have a suggestion. Then I will reject them first, and hope to have the opportunity to meet you." Lin Feng, who achieved his goal, smiled slightly and said, "I'm also looking forward to meeting you, and I believe such an opportunity will come soon." Before hanging up the phone, he added in a low voice, "I think the time for Eagle Country is almost up." This sentence reached Huang Lang's ears, and the next moment Lin Feng hung up the phone gently. Huang Lang didn't quite understand what this meant, but he didn't speculate too much about Professor Lin Feng's words. After all, with Lin Feng's character, if he wanted to express himself clearly, he would definitely not let the other party confuse him. Eagle Country Stonehenge. At the same time, outside the Stonehenge, the Eagle Country's armed forces were already in place. The black mass of special forces carried guns and looked at the Stonehenge in a state of alert. Behind them were countless tanks and various types of armor. The sky was reflected in red, which was the light from the gap in the space in front. The red light was strong and strange, bringing an extremely strong sense of oppression to everyone present. Just when Chief Jike's anxious eyes were cast on the communication equipment countless times, he received a stern rejection from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. "What? You actually rejected it?" And the attitude changed 180 degrees. Although the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs was relatively cold to them before, at least they could still communicate. But now, judging from the meaning between the lines, there should be no room for further discussion. What is going on? What happened? Such a firm refusal? It seemed that there was room for negotiation before. Jike's face became worse and worse. The red light in front of him bloomed in his frightened pupils, and he couldn't help but regret it. The scene in front of him was beyond his imagination, and it was far beyond what they could solve now. Jike's hands trembled, and he shouted, "Contact the higher-ups quickly. We must get in touch with China as soon as possible. If they don't help, if Lin Feng doesn't show up, then the consequences will be disastrous." Jike's heart was undoubtedly broken at this time. When they negotiated with the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs before, they had already put their attitude at the lowest level in the history of Eagle Country's foreign relations. Although they knew that they had illegally invaded China before, in their hearts, China has always been an image of taking the overall situation into consideration, so they thought that China would also provide them with a helping hand for the whole world this time. but the facts proved that China is no longer what it used to be, and he could not judge it by his previous impression. What is going on? Are they not satisfied with the conditions? Harris, who had been observing Jike's expression quietly, asked tentatively, "Sir, does China want to wait until we are unable to deal with this incident before suddenly appearing?" Harris' words made Jike's face even uglier. The point he was most afraid of and worried about was suddenly said by Harris, which directly hit his sore spot. If China did not send Lin Feng over and they handled it improperly, this matter would definitely make the Eagle government lose face in front of the people and the world, and would directly affect the results of the next election, not to mention his own career. Quick. Whatever China asks for is negotiable. Let's speed up the contact. Jike shouted. As long as China can help, and his position can be kept, it would not be a big deal, even if he gave them some concessions temporarily. But China's attitude made Jike feel less and less confident. After thinking about it, he made another call. "Hello, Mr. Pierce, this is Zeke." Pierce on the other end of the phone did not speak at this time. He listened to Zeke's voice silently, wondering in his heart why Zeke suddenly called him. Zeke continued. "The situation is urgent now, and we need your help. Now the United States is the only country in the world that has such strength to help us. As an ally, you will not sit idly by, right?" Zeke's voice was a little anxious, and Pierce guessed that this matter should be a little tricky. It stands to reason that he did not want to get involved in these things. After all, their shield had just lost Natasha and the others, but now the situation is different. Now all forces in the world are afraid of China, and countries all over the world are witnessing China's every move. At this time, they must unite at a disadvantage. This is our shield's responsibility. Can you tell us what happened in detail? Pierce said. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 116. Just you? SHIELD has not been so busy for a long time. A large amount of intelligence from Eagle Country was quickly transmitted to SHIELD's database. SHIELD staff members processed the data non-stop. Giles ordered them to analyze the data processing report in the shortest time. Nick Fury, who was urgently appointed by Pierce as the person in charge of this incident, was listening to the report of the researchers. The data sent to us by Eagle Country is very similar to the research done by Professor Lin Feng of China. What did you say? Professor Lin Feng? Nick Fury said in surprise. He couldn't believe that he could still hear Lin Feng's name at this time. Is this an all-rounder who excels in all fields? Question mark? Yes, we are also surprised. Professor Lin Feng has done relevant research a long time ago, and according to his research results, this incident should not be too worrying. The researcher nodded repeatedly. His pale face due to long-term overtime work became a little ruddy. The flashing eyes in his eyes were the longing that Nick Fury knew very well. It seems that this researcher also admires Lin Feng very much. However, a more surprising cognition hit Nick Fury's heart like a hammer. Just now, all the elites of the United States were gathered together to analyze and process the data sent from Eagle Country. They spent more than an hour to come to the conclusion that Lin Feng had reached a long time ago. And it seems that they have no new constructive suggestions to put forward. Nick Fury couldn't help but wonder, if there was no Lin Feng's research, would they not be able to come to the same conclusion as Lin Feng, even if they spent more time, thus causing the research to reach a bottleneck? In other words, the time they spent can be said to be just the time to find Lin Feng's ready-made answer. If SHIELD really has to analyze these reports by themselves, their answer may be unsolvable. Nick Fury couldn't help but feel a little flustered. This Professor Lin Feng is simply everywhere, and his strength is simply outrageous, but this kind of even terrifying strength can't help but make people feel a little fascinated. Nick Fury shook his head and continued to ask, in addition to Professor Lin Feng's conclusion, what else did you find? The researcher was also a little embarrassed after hearing this, and he said in a whisper, that red light does not belong to any existing substance on Earth. It is very likely to be energy from aliens. Nick Fury exhaled heavily. Aliens? Is it coming again? The last time was already bad enough. Can the United States and the United States really resist this time? His heartbeat in his chest was like a drum. Is it time to use the only and last trump card in his hand? Nick Fury had a plan to establish an alliance a long time ago. He wanted to gather all kinds of superheroes and form a super army to resist alien creatures and protect national security when necessary. However, things did not go as planned. The candidates in his mind all joined China one after another, and even Natasha, who he and director Pierce agreed would not leave SHIELD, was not spared. Fortunately, he still had a trump card in his hand. Steve Rogers. However, this only trump card was also a little unstable. Since the last mission, Roger became very sensitive and irritable. His past experiences were too complicated, and he had been asleep for so many years. He could not keep up with the current rhythm, and he had no expectations for his future life. It can be said that Roger is now like a zombie. But even if he is a zombie, he is the strongest zombie in his hands. Nick Fury made up his mind, and even his steps to find Roger became lighter. Not long after, a fighter plane flew from the United States to the Eagle Country. At this moment, the red light has been completely absorbed into Malekith's body. Malekith's skin seemed to be flooded with countless wriggling worms, crackling in his body, and his blue veins protruded outward, looking very scary. Yes, this is the Ether. The Ether is back, and it is flowing around me now. Ah. This powerful power, I haven't experienced it for a long time. Malekith shouted a little fanatically, and his appearance at this time was completely unrecognizable. Seeing Malekith like this, Loki felt no fear in his heart, but relieved. The power of the Ether was so strong that, even if Malekith could not use all of the boundless power, the energy he had shown so far was enough to kill Odin in his prime. Ha 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 ha. With such power, the whole world will be plunged into darkness. Malekith said loudly. His body became huge as the Ether was integrated, and Loki was like a lamb beside him. Malekith walked forward, and every step he took made a huge sound. At this time, scientists from all over the world gathered at the Eagle Country Stonehenge. Various equipment made mechanical sounds under the use of different scientific research institutions. The different sounds gathered together and were very harsh, which was enough to let people know how abnormal the space distortion here was. The sun gradually set, and the vision became blurred. Searchlights lit up one by one, and the pale light shone on the Stonehenge, which made people feel even more panicked. Everyone silently performed their duties. For a moment, there was no sound, except for the rustling of people's footsteps and the cold and harsh sound of the machines. They also exchanged their views from time to time, but all their cognitions pointed to the grim reality, that is, everything that is happening now is beyond their cognition. It was at this time that Nick Fury brought Steve Rogers here. They stood silently outside the crowd. They could not help much on the technical level, but looking at the equally confused faces of the scientists, they felt that perhaps the scientists did not know much more than them. Nick Fury. And this, the famous Captain America? Zeke was speechless and even laughed. What he had obtained from S.H.I.E.L.D. with great difficulty was a conclusion that Professor Lin Feng had already reached, and a so-called ancient super soldier of the United States. Question mark? The United States. Even if it is already on the decline, it can't pretend to be nothing, right? Question mark? If that red light suddenly bursts out, like what we saw in the live broadcast of the moon landing, I'll trouble you to help. Zeke said sarcastically. Nick Fury knew that Zeke was playing tricks on people, but he didn't say anything. After all, the huge red light in front of him brought such a strong deterrent effect that it was difficult for Steve Rogers alone to be convincing. Steve Rogers himself was also a little uneasy at this time. How could he compare with the ancient gods of China? Zeke's ridicule just now was too obvious, but he was actually speechless. In front of the huge power, he found that he was just a mascot responsible for taking photos with people and signing autographs. At this time, the roar of Zeke, who had already gone to the other side to inspect, came over. Have you contacted China? Chapter 117 Contact China at all costs. What on earth are you doing? The situation is urgent now. We should contact China at all costs. Let the Prime Minister make the call personally, or let the Queen come forward. We must contact China at all costs, otherwise we will be in trouble. Zeke's roar shook the earth, and everyone could hear it clearly in the silence, not to mention Nick Fury and Steve Rogers. They looked at each other awkwardly, and Steve Rogers shrugged and said, "I think there is no point in staying here now. If you ask me, we should leave. We are standing here now, which is no different from the roll of two wooden stakes." Although he didn't want to admit it, Steve Rogers knew clearly that, if something unexpected really happened, he would not be able to deal with it with his ability. At this time, let alone feeling frustrated, he felt that it was normal for him to be unable to deal with it. After all, this situation was not something that a mortal like him could face. Steve Rogers' words just touched Nick Fury's heart. Did he not want to leave? In fact, he had the idea of retreating as soon as he set foot on this land. But he didn't know how to tell director Zeke because of Steve Rogers' face. But leaving now was the best way. Nick Fury frowned, as if he was thinking about what Steve Rogers said, and then he nodded. Just when Nick Fury was about to say something, a piercing alarm sounded. The sound made people cover their ears. What happened? Nick Fury shouted at Steve Rogers. The scholars who had been gathered together for a search shouted in panic. "The data is abnormal. Where are the Chinese experts? We can't handle this situation alone." Suddenly all the shouts stopped, and even the hurricane that was roaring and whistling on the vast plain next to the Stonehenge stopped. Everyone held their breath, and suddenly heard a violent sound. As if the sky and the earth were shattered, the space flashing red light in front of people suddenly exploded, and the red light rushed into the sky like a firecracker. The red light stream was like a surging wave, surging against the grey sky with an overwhelming momentum. In an instant, the sky seemed to be ignited by the holy fire, and a prairie fire spread across the grey sky. But the storm on the ground did not stop. The space was like a surging hole, and the power that swept out from it instantly raised the field next to the Stonehenge to the ground. Even the tanks and various armored vehicles parked safely in the distance were not spared. Most of them were blown into the air in an instant, and then fell heavily to the ground. Some were overturned on the ground like clumsy turtles, staggering and unable to get up. The sound from behind continued to come from the distance. At this time, all signs of civilization created by humans were destroyed, and only the red light was blooming between heaven and earth. The whole world seemed to have become dim, surrendering to the strange and strong red light. Not to mention humans. When the great changes happened, many people were injured by the huge storm, but most of the people here were well trained. They might not be able to cope with this great change, but at least they knew how to protect themselves. Many people took the opportunity to hide in the ravines. They relied on the cover of stones to escape temporarily. The red light of the sky was reflected in the trembling pupils of the people, and they said with lingering fear, "What is this? What is going on? Is this the end of the world? We can't survive in this situation, let alone leave. Huaksha. Where is Huaksha? Only they can save us now." Many people choked up a little. After all, if they hadn't reacted in time just now, they might have been blown into the air and fell heavily to the ground, and even their bodies could not be intact. They faced the scene at this time, and there were only words like gods and Buddhas in their hearts. After all, this kind of power that mortals can hardly resist, and even the scene that is rare in nature, they can't think of any other explanation except that the gods have come. Even Zeke, who has escaped from countless life and death moments, and has great power, doesn't know how to deal with it. He looked dull like everyone else, staring at the sky without any movement. Just when everyone was depressed and didn't know what to do in the face of this huge change, one person stood up proudly. The man who stood up facing the red light that changed the color of the sky and the earth was only red and blue. This distinctive symbol made everyone's eyes focus on him again. A symbol and belief from the past reawakened the courage in people's hearts. It was an attempt made by mankind to break through the limit, representing the highest level of security defense of a country. It was him. It was Captain America. It was Steve Rogers. Captain America Steve Rogers stood up firmly under such circumstances. He was not afraid of the vision of great changes. Even if the red light was reflected on his face, it did not arouse the slightest retreat in his pupils. His resolute and proud attitude inspired everyone. A flame burned in the hearts of the people who were hiding in the ravines in a panic. They were not cowards, they were also warriors defending their country. Steve Rogers' behavior made Zeke excited. He had forgotten his contempt for Steve Rogers just a quarter of an hour ago. What he evoked in his heart at this moment was his childhood memories, the memory of his fanatical admiration and following of Captain America. At the same time, his past courage also returned to his body at this moment. Captain Rogers. Zeke trembled. He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. A full body draw broke out from Director Zeke's body. He roared, trying to make his words clearly reach Steve Rogers' ears. Good job. At the same time, there was a round of applause that could be connected to a storm. In the thunderous applause, everyone shouted along. Good job, Captain Rogers. You have always been my idol. Come on, you can do it, Captain Rogers. Go ahead, we are here to support you. Their roars made Rogers feel as if he had returned to the days on the battlefield. It seemed that the passion had never dissipated, but was just hidden in his body. At this time, the passion in his heart was ignited by the encouragement of the people. Although the hurricane was still howling, sweeping the earth with a gesture of wanting to flatten everything, and although the red light was still blazing in the sky, like the eye of the gods, that thundered all living things, it lowered its cold gaze towards Steve Rogers. But he was no longer afraid, and walked forward step by step. The hurricane made his steps very difficult, and the strong light blocked his sight. He walked very slowly, but was extremely determined. Everyone's eyes were focused on him, and everyone's eyes became more inspiring. Chapter 118. I'm always here. Steve Rogers' back was the last source of strength in everyone's heart. Everyone had a firm belief in their hearts. That is, no matter what, mankind will definitely win the final victory. It seemed that Rogers' action triggered a response. The red light that spread across the sky seemed to shrink the scope of the light as Captain Rogers approached step by step, and even the bright red color seemed to become a little dim. Such a scene undoubtedly strengthened the morale of the people. Even the heaven and earth are afraid of Captain Rogers' footsteps. It seems that all this is not unstoppable. We are saved. Fortunately, there is Captain Rogers. Everything is just a paper tiger. As long as we are brave, we will definitely be able to get out of the predicament. Everyone cheered and supported each other to stand up. At this time, the hurricane on the ground had gradually weakened like the red light, and the researchers also stood up one after another, wanting to resume their research and see what they could do. In the crowd, that became busy and orderly again, Nick Fury stood quietly in place. He looked at Captain Rogers' back, and the shock in his heart could not be described in words. Suddenly, there seemed to be a figure in the red light. The figure was so tall that even Captain Rogers had to look up at it. It was wrapped in red light, and its specific appearance could not be seen clearly, but a strange sense of oppression came from it. Rogers stared at the figure and clenched his fists. His eyes were firm and sharp. He was not afraid of the unknown creature in front of him that brought him a huge sense of oppression. He took a step forward and walked forward quickly and heroically in a posture of welcoming the enemy. He ran, and the red and blue shield held tightly in Captain Rogers' hand, and the stars on it streaked across the sky as he ran at high speed. Ha! Steve Rogers shouted fiercely and jumped up. Even holding a heavy shield did not affect his light jump at all. After a height of more than 10 meters, he suddenly dropped. There was a loud bang, and it was the sound of his shield hitting the figure heavily. The collision dispelled the red light that enveloped the figure. Malekith roared, and the huge roar made the onlookers shrink their shoulders. However, Captain Rogers, who was closest to him, was not afraid at all. He punched Malekith hard. This punch almost gathered all his strength. The power was so great that Malekith's body trembled, and he couldn't help but bend down. Captain Rogers looked at Malekith's skull eyes and said, "Do you want to continue? I'm always here to accompany you." His huge fist still stayed on Malekith's body. This extremely deterrent posture made everyone see that the advantage was mine. Huge cheers resounded throughout the world. However, the sound was suddenly cut off. They clearly saw Malekith's body slowly stand up, and Captain Rogers' fist was still on him. Captain Rogers' body paused slightly, and the next second, with a loud bang, Captain Rogers was like a meteor, and was blasted out in the diffuse smoke and dust. The sound was deafening, and we looked at Captain Rogers in disbelief. Just now, under the gaze of the people, Malekith did not move at all, but Captain Rogers was thrown out. His heavy body and the shining shield fell heavily into a huge pit like a meteorite. For a moment, everyone was stunned. They didn't even realize that they had to help Captain Rogers up. No, it should be said that in this situation, whether Captain Rogers is still alive is already a question. What is going on? Everyone's face turned pale, and their bodies couldn't help shaking. The courage that had just been awakened disappeared without a trace in an instant. Because the change happened so dramatically, everyone even found it a little funny. Captain Rogers' words were still echoing in their ears. Do you want to continue? I'm always here. Didn't you say you're always here? How come he couldn't hold on after just one move? Nick Fury's expression was like a palette, and it was hard to describe. His stiff neck twisted slowly, and he couldn't bear to look at the huge pit where Captain Rogers fell. Just as he turned his head, another earth-shaking roar came. The fire burst out like a flood, and for a moment the flames were more fierce than the flood. The explosions were overwhelming. The strong changes seemed to deprive people of their senses. In the extreme scene, people could only feel the fear that was constantly magnified in their hearts. Could it be that everything ends here? Nick Fury stood there in a daze, having lost the will to survive. The others shouted in panic and became a mess. The researchers had already thrown their instruments aside and ran around, but the world had long been ruled by red light, and there was no pure land. No, I want to live. I can't die here. Run, run, run. For a moment, the researchers screamed. The soldiers ran wildly. The scene was extremely chaotic, and some people bumped into each other in panic. The ground was full of scattered equipment, and many people were tripped by the guns thrown on the ground at random, and the fallen people once again became stumbling blocks for the panicked people. Director Zeke, like Nick Fury, stood there in a daze. He looked at the scene in front of him, his bloodless lips trembling, and he shouted at Harris, who had been standing beside him, and had already lost his mind. Contact China. Contact China immediately, and ask them to send Professor Lin Feng. We can pay any price, as long as Lin Feng can come. Who knew that Harris had already lost his mind, and the reason he didn't run was because his legs were shaking with fear and couldn't move. At this time, he had no ability to deal with Director Zeke's words, and Director Zeke's roar stimulated him instead. Harris burst into tears and pushed Chief Zeke, causing Chief Zeke to stagger. Zeke looked at Harris in disbelief and saw him crying and running into the crowd. Harris's collapse, as Chief Zeke's right-hand man, became the last straw that broke the camel's back. At this moment, he was not angry, but sober. What dignity is still important at this time? Life is more important. He gritted his teeth and stomped his feet and rushed out to catch up with the running crowd. The 60-year-old white-haired chief ran through the crowd like a white straight line. This beautiful scenery line shuttled quickly through the messy crowd, which surprised many soldiers for a moment, but it was only for a moment. At this time, everyone was busy escaping for their lives. Even if Chief Zeke was dancing a striptease now, no one would look at him twice. In front of the huge figure, who could beat Steve Rogers away at any time, everyone was scared to death. They just wanted to get away from here, as soon as possible. Chapter 119 Monster Legion. As early as when the vision occurred, everyone had lost hope. It was Captain Rogers' heroic battle that ignited the only remaining hope in everyone's heart, but this tenacious and fragile hope also completely dissipated with the death of Captain Rogers. Everyone was running in a panic, but it was nothing more than a futile act. At this time, a red light above them flashed across the sky like lightning, like a terrible mouth, grinning at the people running around on the ground, laughing at their wasted efforts. Director Zeke looked up at the sky, and this scarlet scene left an indelible mark in his heart. For a moment, this terrible picture took away all his courage and the will to survive. There is no hope. We have no hope. He stood in the running crowd. People coming and going kept passing by him, and some bumped into his shoulders, but he didn't feel any pain at all. In the face of life and death, this little pain is nothing. He looked at those who were still running, and thought to himself, do they still think they can survive? Director Zeke looked at them, and shook his head. His eyes were dead silent. He suddenly realized that Steve Rogers' action just now was like a last gasp, which was the limit of what they could achieve, and it was just in vain. Boom. A violent explosion sounded. A figure fell in front of the running crowd like a nuclear bomb. Smoke filled the air, gravel flew, people screamed and dodged, many people were already bleeding from the gravel. Everyone covered their wounds and looked at the figure in the thick smoke. Malekith's blood-red eyes were like the eyes of a demon, without a trace of humanity, looking at the people in front of him fiercely and indifferently. His whole body was immersed in a powerful pressure. In the face of overwhelming power, everyone felt like a lamb, without the slightest power to resist. You are so humble. How dare you speak in front of me? You should not exist in a universe ruled by dark elves. His voice was very low, and seemed to be everywhere, echoing clearly in everyone's ears. The light around Malekith continued to expand, spreading out from him. Everyone looked at Malekith in fear, the red light reflected on their pale faces, and everyone felt that they had nowhere to go, and nowhere to hide. What should we do? Oh my god. I didn't expect that the scene I saw during the live broadcast of the moon landing would reappear at this time. Just as people were hesitating, a roar came from the commander. What are you waiting for? Go and shoot. Shoot, shoot. The commander's trembling voice became a life-saving straw in everyone's heart. The word shoot was shouted one after another among the soldiers. They suppressed their voices for fear that the monster in front of them would hear them. Some brave soldiers reached out to touch their guns, but they touched nothing, and their hearts sank. Oh no, I lost my gun when I ran away before. Others were secretly happy because their guns were still there. The few soldiers with guns moved their arms tremblingly. The hands that touched the guns reacted immediately and shot at the black shadow in front of them with the muscle memory of long training. For a moment, there was only the sound of gunshots, and everyone concentrated their firepower on Malekith. Countless sparks bloomed like raindrops in front of Malekith's black figure, and everyone's eyes lit up, but the brilliance in their eyes soon dimmed. Because there was a barrier in front of Malekith, intercepting all the bullets, and the fierce bullets did not touch the figure at all. The red light wrapped around him was even hotter, and all the bullets shot out seemed to be absorbed and turned into a solid fortress outside the figure. How could this happen? The soldiers with guns trembled with their hands. Click. The pistols fell to the ground one after another. For a moment, the pistols that were like life-saving straws just now became scrap metal. Shooting is completely useless! Exclamation mark. The laughter seemed to come from the earth's crust. The sound was so cold, deep, and so far away, but it was clearly heard by everyone. Everyone's heart fell into an ice cave. They heard the black shadow behind the red light continue to say, "Every time you resist, you are just closer to the end." Its words made people look at Captain Rogers, who had been lying on the ground. Now he was still uncertain whether he would be dead or alive. If they didn't resist at the beginning, would their ending be better? Under the huge power of the black shadow, people had already had slave thoughts, but now they couldn't regret it. The red light was like a tide, pouring down on the crowd. Everything happened so quickly that people didn't even make a sound. In just a blink of an eye, they were covered by the whole red light. People subconsciously closed their eyes, but it didn't make any sense. The red light seemed not to be light, but a blazing flame, and the skin of the people wrapped in it was stinging. At this time, Zeke was also surrounded by red light. He endured the burning sensation and tried to open his eyes to look at the light flowing around him. He subconsciously wanted to touch the body covered by the light, but he felt that it was useless. While enduring, he found that his vision was like a layer of red cloth, and there was only scarlet in front of him. What happened? My eyes! Zeke screamed in panic. His voice was very sharp. He looked around his body in panic and found that a black scale like fish scales had grown on his arm, and it was not just this one. The scales also grew upward along his ankles, and the area was getting larger and larger. The skin was painful, as if it was torn, and the unbearable pain made his brain blank. At the same time, an unspeakable anger rose from his heart, and this emotion replaced all his emotions and reason. The raging sea swept through his mind, and all of Zeke's memories were swept away. The red light slowly dimmed, and a monster army appeared in the light. Everyone turned into a tall and strong monster covered with black hard scales. Ha ha ha. This is the look that suits you. The alienated humans made Malekith happy. He took one last look at his masterpiece, then turned and left in the red light. At this time, Malekith no longer followed the original plot completely. He not only used the reality gem, but also used the power of rules. The power of the reality gem itself is very strong. Having the reality gem is equivalent to holding all the power of the material world in your own hands. Not only can you create things according to your imagination, but you can also transform real things. With such a gem, even other gem owners cannot let it be defeated easily. It can be said that among all gems, the reality gem is undoubtedly the strongest. At this time, Lin Feng stood in his room expressionlessly, silently looking at all this. It seems that, after I came to this world, the story began to become different. Chapter 120, Survival from a Desperate Situation. Lin Feng looked at Malekith, and his ability was undoubtedly enhanced. Just as he had expected before, one of the countless situations, the enhancement of Malekith's ability was also within his expectations. It's just that now there are more and more changes, just like the butterfly effect has actually caused more changes. Now it's not just a problem of Malekith, but a little change will radiate to more possibilities in the future. Obviously, this universe is different from the universe of the original plot. It will be a brand new universe with Lin Feng. This is also very interesting. Lin Feng smiled and said, this time, Yang Jian will be stronger when he meets his strong opponent, and everyone's shock value will be higher. In this way, I will be closer to the Tathagata Buddha. When I can have all the abilities of the Tathagata Buddha, everything will not be a problem. Now Lin Feng doesn't have to worry about anything. The development of things is under his control, and his progress is already very fast. He completes the task efficiently and perfectly every time, and gains a lot of shock value, so the amount of points is sufficient. In this way, before the war comes, he is very confident. However, Lin Feng was not blindly optimistic. The number of points is never too much. This time, Yang Jian's battle against Malekith is the best opportunity. At this time, the abnormality of the Stonehenge did not attract the attention of the world. Malekith's ability is overwhelming. No one can predict his arrival in advance, and no one can think of passing information to the outside world at a critical moment. They were annihilated, but the news about Malekith did not spread at all. Now Malekith has left, and those who have been mutated into monsters have lost any thoughts and consciousness. They are rushing in all directions, following the instincts of wild beasts, and rushing towards nearby populated areas. At this time, the relevant departments of Eagle Country knew nothing about all this. They were still waiting in the office for Director Zeke to handle everything safely, but they didn't know that their colleagues had been transformed into monsters. Monsters with black scales lurked in the night, and scarlet eyes flashed in the forest. They sniffed the breath of humans, and roared like wild beasts, as if they couldn't bear the hunger in their stomachs. Most of the mutants were looking for humans, but there was a small group of monsters among them. They went in the opposite direction from the main group and headed towards the Stonehenge. Nick Fury was one of them. He did not lose his will. Nick Fury struggled with the negative thoughts that burned in his heart like a raging fire. It was not pleasant, but it kept him awake. However, the pain from his body kept torturing him. Just when he stopped slightly and wanted to catch his breath, he heard heavy breathing and footsteps. Nick Fury turned around and saw 5 or 6 monsters like himself rushing towards him. Their black scales were extremely hard, and the scarlet light in their pupils showed him a dangerous signal. Obviously, they were exactly the same as Nick Fury, but they were completely different. Nick Fury felt their threat. Just when they were running, and only a few feet away from him, Nick Fury shouted, "It can't end here." He subconsciously drew his gun and calmly aimed at the monsters that were flying towards him and shot. Even though his size had become a monster, he still retained all the habits of a human. At least for him, he would rather die than tear his companion's neck with his sharp teeth. The gunshots rang out. Nick Fury thought he had used the best shooting skills in his life, but it didn't mean much in front of the monsters that were surrounding him at high speed. What's more, those monsters had hard scales on their bodies. Nick Fury knew clearly that, if he was close to them, he would have no chance of survival. "Do you feel the difference between me and you?" Nick Fury muttered as he looked at the hideous monsters. He had regained his composure. He had already acquiesced to the coming of death in his heart, not to mention that these monsters were originally transformed from humans. Being killed by his own colleagues by mistake was better than being crushed to death by the Black Shadow like an ant. However, Nick Fury did not give up the attack. He planned to stick to his own position of resistance until the last bullet was used up. He counted down his remaining bullets. 7, 6, 5. Just when he counted to 5, Nick Fury suddenly made a decision. He stopped shooting, turned the muzzle of the gun, and put the black muzzle straight against his chest. He didn't want his death to be weird and terrifying when humans found him. He was deeply suspicious of his fellow human beings, especially his colleagues in Eagle Country and the United States. They probably didn't know what happened. After blindly or even misleading reports to the audience, who knew what cause of death they would be arranged to have. It's better to die plainly than to become an urban legend. The monsters were getting closer and closer. Nick Fury hardened his heart, closed his eyes, and pulled the trigger at himself. However, the gun stopped, but no sound was heard. Damn it. The bullet jammed. Nick Fury felt complicated. He didn't know whether he should be glad or regretful. But what he was sure of was that he didn't have the courage to shoot himself again anyway. And he not only didn't have the courage, but also didn't have the chance. The monsters were already close to him, their low moans, and the bloody breath around them slowly surrounded him. Nick Fury closed his eyes, but this time he was extremely desperate. Oh my god, why don't you even give me a chance to commit suicide? At this moment, a roar suddenly exploded in his ears. Nick Fury's body moved with it, and he opened his eyes again. But he saw a huge boulder in front of him, and under the boulder were the monsters that were dying. What on earth happened? Question mark? Nick Fury looked around in astonishment. His eyes were fixed directly on the distant flames. A muscular man in red and blue clothes. He stood proudly between heaven and earth like a hero, but his body was already in a mess, with burn marks and dirt all over his body. Even his cheeks were not spared. But this is Captain Rogers. His resolute eyes did not change at all, and he also looked at Nick Fury at this time. Captain Rogers is still alive? Question mark? This reality rekindled the hope in Nick Fury's heart. Is there really such a thing? Nick Fury was surprised and delighted. He didn't expect that, after hitting the ground violently at such a height, Captain Rogers would still be alive, and seem to be fine. This was simply a miracle. And the person who created this miracle was Captain Rogers, which was not very surprising. Not only that, Nick Fury felt that Captain Rogers' ability had been enhanced. With great ecstasy in his heart, he approached Steve Rogers step by step. Chapter 121, Invasion is imminent. Captain Rogers, can you imagine how happy I'm to see you? But what is going on? Rogers was still the same. He smiled at Nick Fury, and then his expression became serious again. He heard Nick Fury's question, but he didn't want to answer. Rogers spoke neatly. We must stop this as soon as possible. That guy went to the south, where there are many villages and residents. We can't let him hurt civilians. We must seek support immediately. I alone is not enough. Captain Rogers' words made Nick Fury wake up from his dream. He quickly restored the communication equipment and called on the intercom. This is Nick Fury. Captain Rogers and I are assisting Director Zeke at Stonehenge, but unfortunately, except for the two of us, we have been wiped out. The enemy is too powerful, and we can't resist it at all. Now he is heading towards Renton. We must intercept him, and not let him invade Renton, otherwise the consequences will be disastrous. But no matter how Nick Fury shouted hoarsely, the recipient didn't pay attention to this unknown telegram message. Nick Fury's report did not conform to the format of the Eagle Country, and the Stonehenge itself was an emergency. Director Nick did not report him at all, and the Eagle Country operator did not know Nick Fury. Although the operator knew Captain Rogers, hadn't Captain Rogers disappeared for many years. So he had already determined that this was a prankster. The operator said unhappily, "How many enemies are there? Who are they?" Nick Fury noticed the other party's bad attitude, but in such an emergency, he still answered. There is only one person on the other side, a monster should be from outer space. Just as Nick Fury was thinking about how to better describe the black shadow, there was a quiet and neat hang-up sound on the other end of the phone. Nick Fury's face turned pale, and he held back the swear words in his heart, and continued to pass the information to the United States. I'm Nick Fury from SHIELD, and there's an emergency. A dangerous creature from outer space is approaching Renton, and we must send out forces to intercept it immediately. There's no time to explain. So go and confirm where it has moved to. At the same time, you also need to contact Eagle Country, and the best outcome is that Eagle Country and the United States work together to intercept the monster outside Renton. After all, everyone in the US authorities knows Nick Fury's name. The operator knew the situation was urgent and immediately took action according to Nick Fury's words. Nick Fury and Captain Rogers, who reported the news, were relieved. But they still had a worried heart. They saw with their own eyes how fast the monster moved, and just during the conversation just now, I'm afraid it was approaching Renton. Can we really intercept it? Nick Fury doubted in his heart. But the answer was something he didn't dare to face. Just as Nick Fury thought, Malekith was not far from Renton. A huge crescent moon hung in the black night sky, but it seemed to be covered in a red mist, emitting a cold red light. It didn't look like the moon, but like the sickle of the god of death. Oh my god, why is today's moon like the blood moon in the novel? A little scary, but a little cool. Is there a special astronomical phenomenon today? The Chinese astronauts should no longer be on the moon, but on their way back, right? People were talking, and had already picked up their phones to take pictures of the sky. Although the blood moon made everyone feel a little uneasy, no one really thought that the danger was approaching, so people stopped and watched, not taking it seriously. But as time went on, they soon discovered something strange. Wait a minute, what is that? Is there someone in that red light? How is this possible? How can humans be there? Are they astronauts? But haven't they come back? Exclamations spread across the streets of Renton. People became more and more uneasy, and social media was bombarded with strange phenomena in the sky, and all this was naturally delayed by politicians. But they had no time. As the red fog-like light spread everywhere, more and more blocks fell into a dead silence. Although the area of Renton was not small, even the red fog would take some time to spread, not to mention that its speed had obviously not accelerated. However, the blocks covered by the red fog were isolated from other blocks, and people outside could not see the situation inside clearly, and did not dare to rush in rashly. But in those covered blocks, there were screams of pain, mixed with roars like wild beasts. Hearing these sounds, people fell into great fear. That was not a sound that humans could make. What happened inside? At this time, people no longer had the leisure to take pictures of the sky as before. They ran desperately away from the red fog. The whole city was instantly in chaos, and the Army's fighter planes arrived at this time. Missiles were concentrated on the figure in the red fog. The arrival of the army made people stop in their tracks. They looked at the countless missiles pouring towards the figure with hope. However, those missiles failed to penetrate the red fog barrier. Not only that, the missiles were detonated the moment they touched the red fog. Bang, bang. For a moment, violent noises resounded through the sky, and the red fog became a sea of fire. People in other blocks could clearly see that the sky above the red fog was dyed blood red. What the hell is going on? Our missiles didn't work at all and exploded. The commander of the emergency command room stared at the screen in amazement. His face turned pale. In the picture, several black figures walked out of the fierce flames. No, they were not people, but monsters! Exclamation mark. The silky skin was replaced by black scales. They were tall, with scalloped eyes, and made strange roars. And there were more than one or a few monsters like this, but all over the street. They filled the streets and alleys densely, doing everything they could to destroy. These monsters bit cars and smashed the windows of roadside shops. Soon, the streets of Renton had become a mess. But this was not enough. They were very fast, and were roaring and running wildly, running towards the safe streets at this time. Who can tell me how people can become like this? They are going to run out. At this time, everyone in the command room was at a loss. Even the commander was afraid of these monsters. However, the missiles were useless, and the soldiers had no way to deal with the fog. If all the soldiers turned into that kind of monster, then they would be wiped out. Chapter 122. The time has come. But the missiles and soldiers cannot be launched. What should we do? Question mark. At this time, planes flew over the sky of Renton. They were private planes of the royal family and dignitaries. They had predicted the urgency of the matter at the first time, and abandoned the city and fled. If ordinary residents who were still in Renton knew the current situation of their city, they would definitely fall into despair. At this time, a voice of collapse came from the command room. Is there any other way? Who can tell me what is going on? The commander collapsed even more after learning that the royal family had fled. He roared, with no confidence in his heart. He knew that he was unable to deal with the current situation. Then he could only give it a try. If it still doesn't work. The commander calmed down slightly and gave the order. Start the fighter planes immediately and approach from high altitude. The fighter planes took off and approached the red fog area one after another. All pilots wore protective clothing, but they couldn't find enough protective clothing for a while. Some wore gas masks. No one knew what this red fog was. It might be some poisonous gas. Everyone was on guard, attacking cautiously from the edge of the red fog. If they couldn't deal with the red fog, at least they could control the monsters with black scales. For a moment, more than half of the entire Renton fell under the rule of the red fog. Not only that, but there were also many monsters moving at high speeds running outwards and attacking pedestrians on the road. However, the commander saw clearly on the screen that they were just wasting their efforts, and there was no help except wasting ammunition. The red fog did not dissipate at all, but continued to spread outward steadily. Those monsters were not only invulnerable to swords and guns, but also moved swiftly. The attacks on them were no different from drizzle from the sky. At this time, the Prime Minister of the Eagle Country, Reza, was looking at the sea of fire below through the window of a helicopter. A few minutes ago, Renton was still safe. Although the public security was not very good and the city was not very clean, Renton was still the face of the Eagle Country. But who could tell her why things changed so much in just a few hours? Question mark? Renton has been surrounded by red fog and sea of fire, not to mention those terrible black monsters. They are like a plague. They can't be killed or destroyed, but they continue to grow and form a terrifying force. Have you contacted Huaksha? The Prime Minister of Eagle Country asked with a trembling voice. However, no one answered her. The whole of Renton is going to be destroyed. You can't even contact Huaksha. Do you want the whole Great Eagle to be destroyed? Although she roared at her subordinates, she was extremely panicked in her heart. She knew clearly why Huaksha couldn't be contacted. If they hadn't done too much over the years, Huaksha would definitely not be like this. However, the last straw that broke the camel's back was undoubtedly the fact that the Eagle Country sent agents to illegally sneak into Huaksha and wanted to attack Lin Feng, a top figure in Huaksha. However, now, only Huaksha can save them. If Huaksha doesn't take action, then the entire Eagle Country will completely withdraw from the stage of history. Not to mention her own small career. Lisha lowered her voice and said firmly, request China's rescue at all costs. We can give everything, as long as Eagle Country can survive this disaster. At this time, the situation in Renton could no longer be concealed. Not only had the people of Renton seen all these terrible scenes on short videos, but people all over the world also saw the real appearance of Eagle Country Renton on the internet. Many headlines attracted people's attention. Emergency report. The whole city of Renton fell, suspected to be invaded by unknown creatures. Toxic red fog filled the sky above Renton, and humans were transformed into zombies. Others were live broadcasting on their mobile phones on the front line, but they often couldn't hold on for long. Soon, only the mobile phone was left to live broadcast alone until the battery of the mobile phone was completely exhausted. Others were at the windows of their homes, broadcasting to the audience the roaring monsters on the streets outside. Soon, there was a violent sound of breaking the door outside. All those who watched the live broadcast deeply felt how desperate the people of Renton were living at this time. Oh my god, what is going on? I'm scared just watching it. It seems that a blogger was attacked just now. People discussed in panic. Even though they were thousands of miles apart, they were shuddering. Many people reflected on whether they could resist all this if it happened in their own country. Many Chinese people thought silently in their hearts. Fortunately they have Lin Feng. Fortunately, they were born in China. If it was China, they would definitely be able to resist all this. At this time, Malekith looked at the shells attacking him from the sky with a cold expression. For him, it was like watching an ant's performance. Would you be angry because ants threw small gravel at you? You would only watch them fighting hard and think it was a bit fun. Or this was just a meaningless dying struggle. And the reason why he did not spread the red fog was because he had his own arrangements. At this moment, a surviving blogger suddenly roared, scaring several netizens who thought he had also sacrificed. Oh my god. Look. What is that? Netizens looked at the live broadcast, and the picture inside was facing the sky. The barrage at this time was full of question marks. What's going on? Although it's a good thing that the blogger is still alive, why do I feel that his mental state is a little? There's nothing in the sky. The blogger didn't say anything, but zoomed in on the picture. It's that wormhole over the Zhangjiang River. I didn't expect to see it again. A corner of the spaceship appeared in the black wormhole. After Loki found the Ether, he left and returned to the Dark Elf's warship, using the cosmic cube to open a time-space gate. At this time, Loki's spaceship slowly emerged from the wormhole. The commander stared at the screen in a daze. The huge spaceship covered Renton like a thick cloud. Such a change made everyone overwhelmed. No one thought that the alien visitors at this time would be friends rather than enemies. The commander collapsed on the chair with a pale face and wailed. It's over. Everything is over. Renton is going to be destroyed. At the same time, Malekith was also looking at the entire city from a high altitude. He didn't want to wait any longer, and was eager to drag the 9 kingdoms into the abyss of darkness. You are just an ant, but you can witness all this. Be grateful. At this time, Renton was completely shrouded in red fog. The ubiquitous cries and calls for help filled people's ears. The sea of fire and dark-scale monsters everywhere were shocking. Seeing this, Lin Feng's eyes flashed. His expression was still indifferent, but he knew in his heart that the time for him to appear had come. In an instant, the silver armor had wrapped around his strong body, and the blood-red cloak was blowing fiercely behind him. He slightly spread out his hands, and the shining 3-pointed double-edged sword was already firmly held in his hands. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 123. How dare an ant look directly at the rising sun? A golden light broke through the air, and Lin Feng took a step into the void. The next second, a bright golden light appeared in the thick black haze above Renton. Just as people were amazed and didn't know what was going on, a powerful voice resounded in everyone's ears. Who dares to shout here? As soon as these words came out, the surrounding space seemed to tremble slightly. Lin Feng took a step to the sky above Renton, like a golden sun, rising suddenly above the black Renton that had already fallen. Everyone looked up at the sky in amazement, and the golden light in the sky reflected everyone's eyes. Who is coming? Why do I feel like they are here to help us? Could it be those ancient gods of China? If it is really them, then we are saved. The sound at this time also alarmed Malekith. He looked up at the sky, and his ferocious face was full of surprise and doubt. Who dares to shout here? Lin Feng repeated it again. This voice was very familiar to the citizens of Renton. Although most of them did not understand Chinese, they had just watched the live broadcast of the moon landing, and were shocked by the magnificent scene and Yang Jian's divine posture, so they were very familiar with this voice. It's Yang Jian. It's Yang Jian. It's him. I remember his voice. Yang Jian said that he would return to the world, but I didn't expect it to be so soon, and the first one to come was actually Renton. It's Yang Jian who came to save us. I wonder if his arrival has anything to do with China. At this time, people looked at the sky excitedly, and their hearts were full of hope. After all, everyone had seen the power of Yang Jian on the moon. If it was Yang Jian, then everything could be solved. At this time, people all over the world saw this scene through the internet, and everyone was also shocked by Yang Jian's arrival. The people of China were also amazed in front of the live broadcast channel. When they heard Yang Jian's voice, they reacted immediately and exclaimed in amazement. Yang Jian. It's Yang Jian. He's here. He's finally here. He's really amazing. His golden light can easily take down the aliens who are causing chaos in London. At this time, the reminder of the increase in points in Lin Feng's ears never stopped. Even when he appeared in Hong Kong before, he had never seen such an exaggerated scene. and that time he was still dressed as Tathagata Buddha. It seems that the series of preparations he made during the moon landing event, and finally Yang Jian's shocking appearance, were all useful. Now not only Yang Jian, but also Lin Feng himself are in the world, and everyone knows them. And Yang Jian's reappearance at this time is also his first appearance in the world. For the people on Earth, it is indeed an unprecedented surprise. However, Lin Feng had already predicted that his points would rise wildly when he appeared again as Yang Jian this time. This is why he had to wait until this time to appear. At the same time, the Queen of Eagle Country was also overlooking the entire Eagle Country from a high altitude. The scene at this time was very spectacular. The red fog and the blazing flames enveloped the entire city. Above the war, a spaceship that could cover the entire city floated in the sky. In addition, a golden light was like the rising sun, looming behind the clouds. In a blink of an eye, the golden light behind the clouds shone brightly, breaking through the clouds and pouring down to the ground. The figure bathed in the golden light was seen clearly by people. The Queen of Eagle Country was full of excitement at this time. She knew clearly that it was the ancient gods from China who came to save them. If it was him, then Renton would be saved. However, the highest commander of the military was a little worried at this time. As the commander who currently had the clearest understanding of Renton's current situation, he was not overly optimistic about Yang Jian's arrival. Because even if Yang Jian, as an ancient god, could fight against that guy, how should he deal with the red fog? The red fog can directly cause mutations in the human body. Not to mention those who are about to mutate. Even those who have already mutated, it is estimated that they cannot be saved and can only be eliminated. As for the red mist, no matter what method they used before, they could not do anything with it, and they could not even penetrate it. Just when the commander was worried, Yang Jian on the screen slowly fell down and actually went directly into the mist. Oh no, the commander shouted. He didn't expect Yang Jian to die as soon as he arrived. It seems that Yang Jian didn't know the power of the red mist, so he landed directly. Just when the commander was desperate, his eyes stared at the screen and suddenly widened. His face was full of disbelief, and he said tremblingly, "How did he do it? It can be like this. This is too amazing." On the huge display screen, what overwhelmed the strange red mist was the golden light around Yang Jian. Yang Jian's golden light actually eroded the red mist in an instant. The golden light flickered violently. Yang Jian's brilliance was dazzling and powerful, and the red mist seemed to shrink and kept avoiding, gradually dimming. The commander realized at this moment that he was really stupid. It was really unreasonable to speculate about Yang Jian in ancient times with the limited cognition of human beings. Yang Jian is the embodiment of omnipotence. Everyone looked at Yang Jian at this moment and saw that he looked at the alien creature in front of him with cold eyes, without any fear. At this moment, Lin Feng looked at Malekith with a little curiosity. He had only seen Malekith in movies before, but he felt that there were still many differences when he really met him in reality. At this moment, Malekith's strength was far greater than that of Malekith in the movie. Thor could not fight Malekith now, he would only be defeated. Lin Feng shook his head. However, even if Malekith could use the reality gem at this moment, he would not be his opponent. The most important consideration for Lin Feng was how to get more points. Malathus was also looking at Lin Feng, who fell from the sky at this moment. He knew nothing about the golden man in front of him, but he knew that this person was very strong even by instinct. He looked at the other party warily, but found that he could not see anything. The only thing he could know was the fear in his heart. This cognition even surprised Malekith. He who possessed the ether energy and the reality gem was actually afraid of each other. Question mark? How absurd, but it was reality. Malekith couldn't help but speak first. Who are you? Be the first to say your name. I have never heard of your name in the 9 kingdoms. Malekith's question made Lin Feng stunned. He sneered and said, how dare an ant look directly at the rising sun and be so disrespectful in front of me? Yang Jian's voice was as loud as the creation of the world. Malekith felt like a sharp sword pierced his ears, but he didn't react because of his face. What surprised him even more at this time was that Yang Jian's lips were only slightly opened. If you didn't look carefully, you couldn't see that he opened his lips at all. Chapter 124 High Speed Showdown. The majesty and strength of Yang Jian at this time made Malekith dare not resist at all. His body was a little stiff, and he dared not move. In a desolate place like the earth, there would be such a powerful force. Where did this man in front of him come from? Malekith originally thought that he would be invincible and become the most powerful existence in the universe after being possessed by the other energy. However, he did not expect that he would encounter an existence that made him powerless to resist in just a short while. Even if Odin in the past was in front of Malekith, he would not be afraid at all. But the man in front of him suddenly floated in with golden light, as if he had all the power over Malekith like a god. Just when Malekith was about to be overwhelmed by Yang Jian's momentum, suddenly a voice sounded in his mind. It was Loki. The one in front of you is Yang Jian, the ancient god of China. He should have just woken up. Loki did not expect that he had finally found reinforcement, but when the reinforcement arrived to achieve his goal, Yang Jian woke up. This is too unfortunate. It seems that Professor Lin Feng's words should be kept in mind. Malekith felt a little relieved at this time. Although he did not regard Loki as a companion, he felt relieved to hear Loki's voice and reminders at this time when he was isolated and helpless. And Loki's voice sounded again. You don't have to be afraid of him. This guy, even if he was very powerful in ancient times, he has just awakened after all, and his strength is far less than that of the past, so you don't need to be afraid, but you must deal with him immediately. Loki said while sighing that it was a good thing that he asked Professor Lin Feng, otherwise this godlike man would really make him at a loss when he came out of nowhere. Malekith should have felt excited when he heard Loki's words, but at this time he had some doubts in his heart. He knew in his heart that the powerful man in front of him would not let him go easily, so he could only fight to the death. He had been waiting for thousands of years. During the long time, his unwillingness in his heart increased day by day. No matter who it was, he could not stop him at this time. I will trample on anyone who dares to stand in my way like an ant. No one can stop me from dragging this world and the entire universe into the abyss. Malekith knew very well that the man in front of him was far from his opponent. His current ability was so powerful, but he was still not fully awakened after waking up. Malekith was full of fear, but he would not waver in his thoughts, so he decided to burn his boats. He was determined to use his life as a bargaining chip to exchange for the energy of the reality gem. Boom. Time and space were distorted violently. With the thunderous sound that seemed to come from the clouds, the red mist regained its vitality and began to scatter. The already dim color also shone, and it could even be compared with Yang Jian's golden light for a while. And all this came from the energy transmitted from Malekith. And the energy in his body was still pouring out continuously, causing a continuous impact on the real world. And all this was within Lin Feng's perception. This means that Malekith's ability to use ether is becoming more and more proficient, and his degree of mastery is increasing. Use your own life to exchange for energy. Loki watched everything that happened in front of him, and he was pleasantly surprised. Malekith was more powerful than he had imagined, and nothing could make him happier than the power of his temporary ally. As Professor Lin Feng said, the power of Tathagata Buddha may not be as strong as Yang Jian. Originally, Yang Jian's existence made me afraid, but now it seems that Malekith may be able to fight him. Malekith, you are indeed the one I chose. Quickly subdue Yang Jian, then my plan will succeed. Although Malekith is powerful, this is in exchange for his life. Loki not only has to use Malekith's powerful ability, but also make sure that he can contain him. After all, he can't watch Malekith drag the 9 kingdoms into the abyss. He just wants to make sure that he can own the 9 kingdoms. He wants to be the supreme ruler, that's all. But for now, Malekith must defeat Yang Jian. Originally, Loki didn't have hope for Malekith's strength, but now it seems that things may have changed. After exhausting his life, the energy gained must be unmatched. Malekith at this time even surpassed Odin's ability. Bang! Malekith's power was enhanced at this time, and he had full control over the space. The sky in the distance was rapidly turning red under the traction of his energy. No one can stop me now. Even you can't quench my flame of revenge. The 9 kingdoms will become the nourishment of my revenge, and the energy of the dark elves will sweep the entire universe. And you, I will bury you with respect, Yang Jian. The low voice echoed in the sky through the vibration of space. Everyone could hear Malekith's words, but no one saw his mouth move at all. They confronted each other in the sky above Renton. One person was behind a dazzling golden light, and the other was surrounded by red light. No matter who they were beyond human imagination. Everyone held their breath and looked at the two people in the sky. The war was about to break out. There was fear and eager expectation in the eyes of the people watching. In this atmosphere, Malekith took the lead. Although he just spoke arrogantly to Yang Jian, he was not very confident after all. After all, he exchanged his life for energy, and the time he used his ability was very precious, so he must take the initiative and hit the target with one blow. As Malekith moved, Yang Jian also moved. They kept speeding up. In a duel between masters, the faster one often has the upper hand. The red light exerted force as Malekith made his move, and the red light gradually turned into a protective shield, covering Malekith in it. Yang Jian increased his offensive, and his golden light was like a sharp sword, stabbing Malekith. Their speed was no longer something that humans could distinguish with the naked eye. They were like a stream of light, and people only felt a flash in front of their eyes and saw nothing, but the surrounding buildings became a piece of scorched earth and broken tiles. The deafening sound was endless, and the whole of Renton seemed to be cut in half. This scene made the Prime Minister of the Eagle Country look very serious. Although Renton was almost an empty city at this time, and the place where they fought was in the core of the thick fog, so there would be no casualties. But, with this kind of fighting style, it is estimated that Renton is no longer a problem of reconstruction, but a question of whether it can be rebuilt. But he couldn't think about it, and the two strong men who were fighting were obviously not thinking about this problem. They were still fighting at high speed, like two meteors, testing each other, colliding with each other. One after another dazzling lightnings flashed from their battle, and the strong light waves made people's hearts surge. Chapter 125 Isn't being abused enough. Yang Jian and Malekith had not yet officially fought each other, but it was just an appetizer before the fight. In the process of testing each other with Yang Jian, Malekith knew more and more about Yang Jian's strength. His eyes deepened in color, and his control over reality continued to deepen. The gorgeous red seemed to be burning in his eyes, and strange ancient lines flowed out of his eyes. Countless weapons were transformed from the fragments of ether, and the red dagger broke through the air. Wherever it went, there was a gust of wind. This magnificent scene shocked everyone, and everyone stared at everything in front of them. The sky was full of attacks, and the sharp speed attacked Yang Jian. But he did not change his face. Strength and speed were his strengths. In an instant, the sky flashed with golden petals rain, and those petals transformed by golden light fluttered in the sky, and the dazzling light was a thrilling beauty. The next second, the seemingly harmless golden petals collided fiercely with the red blade. Bang! The huge collision sounded in everyone's ears with a force that was about to overturn Renton. The dazzling gold and the dazzling red intertwined with each other, bursting out dazzling light. This was the purest and most direct attack, a direct collision of the power sources of the two strong men. However, at this time, it seemed to be tit for tat in the eyes of the spectators, but in fact, Malekith's heart was already half cold. He knew clearly that Yang Jian was definitely not someone he could shout at. At the moment, when their light touched each other, Malekith's body had been severely injured, but it was not clear under the cover of the strong light, and Malekith's weapons were like drizzle, causing no damage to Yang Jian's body. Only when it collided with Yang Jian's light, the tiny sparks proved that his weapons were real. Otherwise Malekith would doubt that his weapons were just an illusion. Yang Jian's strength seemed to be limitless. Whenever Malekith exhausted all his strength and launched a fierce offensive, his attacks would be easily resolved by Yang Jian. Yang Jian himself seemed to be an endless source of energy. He devoured any attack from Malekith and was simply invincible. If it weren't for Malekith, who exchanged his life for the full power of the reality stone, so he could complete the repair of his arm in an instant. Otherwise Malekith believed that he would have become dust long ago. In any case, Malekith had no way out. He could only fight Yang Jian until the moment he completely died. He used his body as fuel to endlessly support the use of the reality stone. Malekith understood that, only by exerting the energy of the reality stone infinitely, there would be a slight possibility of winning the battle against Yang Jian. Boom. Boom. The sound of collisions came one after another, and it never stopped. Everyone's ears were a little bit unbearable to such a loud noise, but what was even more unbearable was Renton, who had almost been razed to the ground. If it weren't for the iconic buildings, no one would recognize that the ruins on the screen were the international metropolis of Renton. And those iconic buildings had long been in tatters, falling into the dust, covered with thick dust, and even worse, they had broken into a pile of dregs. But at this time, people didn't even care to lament for Renton. They stared blankly at the two figures fighting on the screen. No, at this time, it can't be said that they were fighting. Because the powerful alien who was domineering and arrogant in Renton just now has become a defeated general under the hands of Lord Yang Jian. Facing Yang Jian's offensive, the alien has no power to resist. His body is already broken, like a rag bag without a single intact place. Looking at this disheveled and embarrassed alien, no one would have thought that it was him who just released the red mist that filled the sky over Renton. And he was still fighting desperately. His body was still subconsciously resisting Yang Jian's attack. When Yang Jian's fist, which was wrapped in golden light, hit the alien's body, the alien also subconsciously hit back. However, as soon as he stretched out his fist, Yang Jian's huge and sharp light exploded towards him. There was another bang, and the light exploded. The screen was white. When people opened their eyes, the light dissipated, and on the ruins was actually the alien's arm. Lord Yang Jian actually blew off the alien's arm with just light. His fist didn't even touch the alien's body. However, all this was just the beginning. The muffled sound of the body being attacked continued to come. The golden light floated rhythmically with Yang Jian's movements, like dancing, and actually turned into a huge clock in the sky. There was a faint glow on the big clock, composed of golden light, and it looked like an ancient language. When you looked closely, no one could understand what it meant. People only knew that with every punch Yang Jian threw, the bell would ring melodiously, as if cheering for Yang Jian. The sound of the bell became more and more rhythmic with Yang Jian's movements, like a holy chant. This music seemed to be able to cleanse people's hearts, and it was transmitted from the outside to the inside to everyone's heart. People looked at the scene in front of them, their eyes motionless, and they dared not move away from the screen at all. They were afraid that they would miss the rare excitement in the world if they blinked. Unconsciously, as the alien completely became Yang Jian's sandbag, people even felt sympathy for the alien in their hearts. That alien was really miserable. Lord Yang Jian was not on the same level as him. But who told him to be so ignorant in front of Lord Yang Jian before? So now being suppressed and beaten by Yang Jian was also his own fault. Malekith didn't know yet that he had been sympathized by the humans who were like ants and despised by him. This kind of sympathy with low lethality and great insult. If Malekith knew it, I'm afraid he would be ashamed and angry and die. But he was ignorant and only had Yang Jian in his eyes at this time. He was still resisting stubbornly. You think you can make me give up by humiliating me like this? My body can be repaired continuously. Even if I'm beaten by you, I can bet with you who will be the first to exhaust all my strength. Malekith said, as if he wanted to show his repair function, and was about to restore the arm that Yang Jian had broken. However, Yang Jian snorted coldly. The next second, Malekith's head was hit into a deep pit by Yang Jian. Boom. At this time, the audience could only see a red light falling like a meteor. The red light penetrated one broken building after another, and finally turned into thick smoke and dust covering the huge pit on the ground. That alien was beaten away by Lord Yang Jian. It ended so cleanly. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.